aqui conosco mais uma vez, e nessa edição será basicamente mais ênfase, né, na questão do bovinos e também na ovinocultura. A gente fez a nossa primeira edição bastante focada em avicultura e hoje são dois setores, bovinocultura e ovinocultura também. Portanto, claro, podem ao longo aqui do nosso webinar colocar as suas questões, os seus comentários, as suas dúvidas, inclusive na nossa audiência internacional também, desejando uma boa tarde para vocês, a quem está aqui no Brasil, em algumas partes ainda é bom dia, mas em algumas localidades já é boa tarde, então podem colocar aqui as suas questões ao longo da nossa programação, que a gente faz questão de ficar atentos aí a tudo o que acontece e sanar as dúvidas aí de todo mundo, tá bom? E claro, para fazer essa abertura mais uma vez, aqui conosco, CEO da CDIAL Halal, Ali Saif. Bom dia para você.
Bom dia, Renata. Bom dia a todos. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Que a paz e a bênção de Deus estejam com todos. Novamente, estamos tendo essa honra de termos pessoas tão ilustres, tão queridas por nós, como a doutora Tempo, a doutora Erika, o Sheikh Hamid Bukhari, a quem tenho grande admiração, ele sabe muito sobre isso. Agradecer a toda a equipe, Michel, toda a equipe do CDIAL, as tradutoras que fizeram um excelente trabalho. Eu quero também agradecer os impressionantes 998 inscritos do primeiro webinar. Foi um sucesso total, foi maravilhoso. A gente iniciou o webinar anterior com sucesso maravilhoso. Nós não tínhamos a expectativa, né? Nós começamos com 700, terminamos com 998. Se eu soubesse disso, talvez teria colocado maior espaço, mas graças a Deus foi excelente. Participante do mundo inteiro. Nós tínhamos pessoas da Indonésia, da Malásia, Nova Zelândia. Pelo que eu notei, havia pessoas de todos os continentes. Graças a Deus, foi um grande sucesso, ao qual acredito, tenho grande confiança que esse também será um grande sucesso, se Deus quiser, para mandar essa mensagem para o mundo que nós devemos, para mandar a mensagem para o mundo que esses dois pontos são de suma importância, o halal e o bem-estar animal. Nunca pensar em duas coisas diferentes, são dois pontos que deviam andar juntos, e eles andam juntos. Pela religião islâmica, o assunto é de suma importância. E temos que, se nós quisermos trabalhar de maneira adequada para esse mercado, temos que levar em consideração esses pontos de tamanha importância. Não apenas pensando nos nossos negócios, pensando nos nossos filhos, no consumidor, para ter um bom produto, e também aprendemos a trabalhar de forma adequada, sempre respeitando as boas práticas e o bem animal. Eu quero também agradecer que até o momento temos mais de 700 inscritos e aparentemente, ao decorrer aqui, nós vamos atingir a meta aí de 900 ou 1.000 inscritos. E, novamente, eu digo que é muito fácil ter sucesso tendo pessoas tão ilustres aqui participando, e o debate é de suma importância, sabe? Eu notei, doutora Tempo e Erika, que após o nosso webinar, muitos certificadores, pessoas da Europa, da Oceania, começaram a discutir que o assunto era de suma importância para eles, que eles têm essa questão no dia a dia deles. Então, puxamos um debate muito importante que eu acredito, se Deus quiser, ficará marcado para os futuros encontros internacionais, que será discutido até por autoridades que demandam isso e que têm a importância de criar regulamentos e normas. Veja que até o responsável pelo CIMIC, da OIC, que é a Organização Islâmica do Comércio, participou e fez uma pergunta diretamente. Eu quero também aproveitar vocês e dizer que o que nós discutimos aqui, nós queremos um debate técnico, não estamos buscando informar aos nossos clientes ou aos alunos ou até as pessoas do mercado que é o que deve ser, que esse é o procedimento de um país ou de outro. O CDIAL ele tem por obrigação fazer com que se cumpra os regulamentos. É de suma importância que todos nós entendemos que o halal e o bem-estar animal são metas a serem atingidas e, às vezes, difere a opinião de país a país. Então, é de suma importância que os produtores entendam que o que nós vamos discutir aqui é a opinião técnica das doutoras, com toda a sua experiência, e vamos tentar aprender o máximo possível, tentar entender um pouquinho mais com o Sheikh Hamad Bukhari como a religião islâmica vê, mas no final do dia nós temos que respeitar os regulamentos. Veja que tem a questão da insensibilização com os países, autorizam o abate halal, a insensibilização, existem outros que não autorizam, tem uns que autorizam, porém coloca restrição como a questão do método, no caso do boi, não permite a pistola penetrativa, e sim aquele mesh, como se aquela pistola de impacto. Existe também toda uma divergência em cima disso, mas o que eu noto, como CEO do CDIAL, que participa com esses países, ninguém tem má intenção, muito pelo contrário. Todos eles tentam colocar um regulamento, normas para os seus países, visam trazer o melhor produto, o melhor práticas a serem aplicadas para o seu consumidor. Então, temos que entender, argumentar muitas vezes, mas no final do dia temos que cumprir. Eu não quero prolongar, eu quero agradecer novamente às doutoras. Hoje, como eu disse, temos aí um grande desafio, que é discutir sobre o bovino e os ovinos. Temos aí pessoas da Argentina, do Uruguai, temos de toda a América do Sul, tudo também com essa questão. Então, eu vou encaminhar aqui para os senhores, as senhoras, que iniciem as palavras. E lamentavelmente, meu pai gostaria de entrar, mas ele tem não poderá entrar, vai virar um vídeo sobre ele, mas estamos aí, estamos à disposição. Muito obrigado e estamos contando com vocês aí. Estou ansioso para ouvir aqui os grandes ensinamentos da doutora, da querida Erika, do Sheikh Hamad Bukhari. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada, Ali, pelas palavras e colocando, como sempre, né, essa aliança e essa verdade que existe no casamento entre bem-estar animal e também o mercado halal. Muito importante também você colocar um pouco das questões da ovinocultura, que também falaremos aqui, já que além do Brasil, né, a atividade vem crescendo muito aqui em várias regiões brasileiras. A gente tem, por exemplo, como você bem pontuou, países aqui da América do Sul, Argentina, que é bastante forte, Uruguai também, nessa atividade. A gente tem, por exemplo, Nova Zelândia, muito forte em ovinocultura, e claro, e a gente sabe da essência da pecuária de corte, claro, e de todo o trabalho aí feito pela doutora Erika e também pela doutora Tempo, e que vai trazer muita propriedade e muita informação com conteúdo técnico qualificado para passar aí para toda a nossa audiência online. Nesse momento, então, gostaria de dar as boas-vindas também ao Sheikh Mohammed El Bukai. Salam aleikum.
Bom dia, Renata. Salam aleikum. Muito obrigado. Eu quero agradecer mais uma vez esse convite. Eu quero desejar muito sucesso para esse evento também, como foi o primeiro. Desejo muita refeição intelectual que tivemos naquela vez, que podemos ter mais uma refeição cultural benéfica para todos nós, se Deus quiser. Muito obrigado e muito sucesso.
Obrigada, com certeza a gente vai conseguir passar de maneira bastante inteligente, diferenciada também, através aí dos seus ensinamentos, o que significa, né, e essa percepção entre halal e bem-estar animal. Muito obrigada, então, também por estar novamente aqui conosco, e como já disse o Ali, né, o senhor Saif está com a gente e deixou uma mensagem em vídeo para a gente acompanhar um pouco aí do que será esse dia memorável também para a pecuária e a pecuária de corte, bovinocultura e ovinocultura, o bem-estar animal e as demandas do mercado halal. Vamos acompanhar então o vídeo, a mensagem que ele deixa para nós hoje. Nós estamos com uma questão de áudio, né, do senhor Saif. Vamos tentar novamente aqui colocar para nós, para a gente tentar escutá-lo. Vamos ver.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أيها الإخوة الأحبة، مرحبا بكم في مؤتمر الحلال والرأفة بالحيوان ومتطلبات المستهلك المسلم. مرحبا بكم أيها الضيوف الكرام، أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب الفضيلة، أصحاب السعادة، فضيلة الشيخ محمد البقاعي إمام مسجد البرازيل، مع سعادة النائب الفيدرالي ألسو موريرا رئيس الكتلة النيابية الفيدرالية للزراعة، السيد ممثل معالي الوزيرة وزيرة الزراعة تيريزا كريستينا، والدكتورة الشخصية العالمية المعروفة والمرموقة في مجال الدفاع عن الحيوان والرأفة بالحيوان، تامبو جرانين رائدة الرأفة بالحيوان، والتي عرفت عالميا بدورها الكبير في هذا المجال، والدكتورة أريكا فوغد رئيسة المؤسسة المشهورة في هذا المجال كذلك المسمات فوغد كونسلتورية، والأستاذ العزيز الأستاذ علي أحمد الصيفي المشرف على الجهاز الذبح الحلال والمنظم لهذا المؤتمر. أيها الإخوة الأحبة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام على الجميع، أهلا وسهلا فيكم من ضيوف ومشاركين الإخوة في المؤسسات الإسلامية المشاركة من خارج البرازيل ومن داخل البرازيل ومن الولايات الأخرى، وكذلك الشركات المصدرة والمصنعة للحم الحلال. ويعني هنا نهتم كثيرا بموضوع الطيور والدواجن ومشتقاتها، BRF، أورورا، JBS، امبريزاز المشاركة معنا في هذا. مرحبا بكم وتحية لكم وأهلا وسهلا بكم إخواننا الأعزاء. يعلم الجميع عن أهمية الذبح الحلال والطعام الحلال بالنسبة للمستهلك المسلم. المستهلك المسلم إذا لم يكن هذا الطعام أو هذا اللحم أو هذا المنتج ومشتقاته ضمن الضوابط الشرعية يعتبر لحم غير شرعي ولا يجوز للمسلم أن يستهلكه. فلذلك نعطي أهمية كثيرا، والحمد لله نحن صرنا في مجال الذبح الحلال وفي تطوير هذا العمل. يعني أول مؤتمر عقدناه للحلال كان في التسعينات، كان 93 أو 32 في العام 93، وعقدنا عدة مؤتمرات 6 أو 7 لهذا في هذا المجال، كما عقدنا عدة دورات للقائمين في هذا، للمنتجين، للجزارين، للمشرفين، وكذلك عدة لقاءات ودورات للمنتجين. كما عقدنا مؤتمر متخصص لغير المسلمين أو للجهات التي لها علاقة بطريقة أخرى في الإنتاج هذا، والحمد لله كلها كانت دورات ناجحة وتدريبية وكذا. بهذا أقول يعني، وهذا شرف كبير أن نقول من خلال خبرة أكثر من 30 سنة، حوالي 40 سنة كسبنا خبرة في هذا المجال، وخبرة الحمد لله ساعدتنا كثيرا يعني لتطوير العمل وللتعرف على هذا. ونحن كذلك الحمد لله استطعنا أن نستضيف شخصيات عالمية ودينية، عدد من رئيس مجلس العبادي من رئيس مجلس الفقه في رابطة العالم الإسلامي، بعض كبار العلماء من المملكة العربية السعودية، مفتي دولة الكويت، بعض المفتين من لبنان، خليل الميس وآخرين. كذلك من الأردن ومن مصر ومن فلسطين، والحمد لله كانت يعني دعوات كبار الشخصيات وكبار العارفين والمختصين في الحلال، وكل هذا حتى نستطيع أن ننتج الطعام الحلال الذي يصلح للاستهلاك من قبل المسلمين ضمن ضوابط شرعية سليمة 100%. بهذا من خلال خبرة 40 سنة في هذا المجال أستطيع أن أقول بكل قوة وبصراحة وبوضوح بأن جهاز الذبح الحلال الذي يشرف عليه الأستاذ علي أحمد الصيفي، الله يرضى عليك يا علي، هو من أفضل وأصدق وأكثر خبرة وحرصا على الإنتاج الحلال من خلال هذه الخبرة 30 سنة، ومن خلال الاعتماد على كثير من الكوادر العلمية والزيارات الميدانية. يعني أذكر بعض الرموز من المملكة العربية السعودية، من جامعة الإمام، من وزارة الأوقاف، ومن مؤسسات أخرى، والحمد لله. بارك الله فيكم وأهلا وسهلا فيكم. إن شاء الله هذا المؤتمر نتوصل إن شاء الله إلى أن نتفاهم فيما بيننا ونضع خطة للاستمرار ولتطوير هذا العمل ولتدارك ما يمكن تداركه حتى يكون عملنا خالصا لوجه الله تعالى، وضمن الضوابط الشرعية وضمن الضوابط الإنسانية التي تطلبها هذه الشخصيات المرموقة عالميا، أتونا من أمريكا حتى يعني ننصح، وهذا ليست المرة الأولى، هذه الثانية والثالثة، والعمل مستمر إن شاء الله. شكرا للبرازيل، شكرا لوزيرة الزراعة، شكرا لمعالي لسعادة النائب الفيدرالي، شكرا للإخوة جميعا، وشكرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Muito bom, nós acabamos então de ouvir as palavras do senhor Saif, presidente da CDIAL Halal, falando desses mais de 40 anos de atividade, destacou aí algumas regiões, por exemplo, a presença forte aí na Arábia Saudita, entre tantas outras regiões aí do mundo também, e que lidam com o mercado halal. Foi muito bom a gente entender o que é essa companhia e como que ela exerce aí o seu trabalho e as suas funções, e acabou sendo referência, uma das referências aí no mercado de certificação halal e sendo uma das principais aí do mundo. Bom, nesse momento, então, para a gente entender de fato o que é a CDIAL Halal, nós preparamos um vídeo que a gente vai exibir agora para vocês.
Há mais de 30 anos, atuamos com certificação halal de alta qualidade, humana e consciente. A empresa com mais categorias para certificação halal no Brasil. A CDIAL Halal é uma das principais empresas no âmbito nacional no que diz respeito à específica certificação halal no setor alimentício e figura entre as maiores certificadoras halal de proteína animal no mundo, em atuação com as principais exportadoras brasileiras. Somos uma empresa que busca alcançar a qualidade e excelência na certificação halal e contribuir com o crescimento da comunidade islâmica através de atividades em conjunto com instituições islâmicas e assessorar empresas interessadas em operar comercialmente no mercado do mundo islâmico. Por isso, além da certificadora, atuamos também no Centro de Divulgação do Islã para a América Latina, com sede em São Bernardo do Campo, São Paulo, que tem por objetivo divulgar a cultura e o conhecimento islâmico através de diversas atividades. Focada em sua missão de ser reconhecida mundialmente, não apenas pela comunidade islâmica, mas pelo mundo todo por sua extrema qualidade e cuidado, a CDIAL Halal atua com a CDIAL Academy, um centro de capacitação para quem deseja abrir um mundo em oportunidades na exportação com conteúdos exclusivos e certificados em todo o universo halal, desde o conhecimento religioso, cultural e técnico. Nossa função é beneficiar os produtos e comportamentos
Muito bom, então nós acabamos de acompanhar um pouco, né, do trabalho que vem sendo feito aí ao longo desses mais de 40 anos, como já disse, o senhor Saif já mencionou também aqui o CEO da CDIAL Halal, Ali Saif, e justamente para mostrar e demonstrar o potencial, então, desse mercado. E agora, então, a gente recebe elas que são referência mundial em bem-estar animal. E, claro, eu sempre falo que tem pessoas que dispensam apresentações, tem profissionais que a gente, só pelo nome, a gente não precisa nem passar o currículo, mas, claro, seguindo aqui o protocolo para entender, né, um pouco do que significa essas profissionais. Claro que a gente sempre passa em um resumo apenas do trabalho de cada uma delas. Bom, nós estamos recebendo aqui hoje, mais uma vez, a doutora Erika Voogd, ela que é presidente da Voogd Consulting, que é uma empresa localizada em Chicago, lá nos Estados Unidos, e ela tem expertise em várias áreas, como, por exemplo, bem-estar animal, muito bem pontuado, segurança alimentar também, garantia de qualidade, cumprimento das regulamentações do USDA, né, que é o órgão do Departamento de Agricultura do governo norte-americano, ou USDA. E também nós teremos aqui, claro, a presença da doutora Temple Grandin. A doutora Temple Grandin é PhD em ciência animal desde 1989 pela Universidade de Illinois, nos Estados Unidos, e ela é líder mundial em boas práticas humanitárias. Ela é formada em psicologia e também tem mestrado em ciências animais, com ênfase no comportamento animal. Muito bom dia para vocês, a palavra é de vocês, doutora Erika, doutora Temple, sejam muito bem-vindas aqui, mais uma vez, agora a nossa segunda edição do webinar, focado em pecuária, bovinocultura e ovinocultura também. Sejam bem-vindas.
Thank you.
You start, Erika.
Bom dia and assalamu alaikum. And good morning. Hello to everybody around the world. And we're really happy to be here. This morning, we're going to present Dr. Grandin's training information on humane handling that she uses globally, worldwide. And I know most of you prefer to hear from Dr. Grandin because she's the most famous, and these are her slides today. Last time they were my slides that we presented on chickens. So today they're Dr. Grandin's slides. So she will be doing most of the talking. My job is to help with the changing of the slides, and I will make comments as we go along to help her to explain some of the issues. We will have questions and answers at the end. If you have questions, feel free to let us know. Renata is keeping track of some of the questions for us in the chat box. Okay. And with that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll start the presentation.
Just waiting for the slides to come up.
I hope they're coming up.
Yep, they're coming up.
Huh?
That first slide right there is actually a picture that Erika took probably down in Brazil of Nelore cattle. Really nice picture. And I think we can go right on to the next slide, because the next slide I talk about, I get asked all the time by people, are animals afraid of getting slaughtered? I have found they're more afraid of people standing in the wrong place. Those people should not be standing in front of the cattle. There's a little piece of chain hanging down. I've seen animals stop because a paper towel was going like this. Just a little paper towel moving like this, and that would make the animals stop. They're afraid of little visual distractions that most people do not notice. And there's actually been research done on the amount of stress at the slaughterhouse. Yes, there is stress, but it's similar to the same amount of stress they would have at the ranch vaccinating. This slide shows a correctly stocked lairage pen. This picture was taken by my student, Helen Klein, at 3 o'clock in the morning. And she wanted to make sure that the animals had enough space to all lay down at the same time. That would also apply to sheep. Must have enough space to lay down at the same time. Now, the next slide shows too many animals stuffed in a pen. At night, they would not have time to lay down. This pen is over capacity, overstocked. The next slide's a really nice picture from Erika showing a lightly stocked pen. It's also showing a really good non-slip floor. Non-slip flooring is essential. And one of the things that we measure in animal handling in the animal-based scoring system is falls. And if more than 1% of the animals fall during handling, you either have a problem with rough handling or your flooring needs to be replaced. But that's a very good floor. The next slide.
Hang on, Tibble. I want to make one comment about the non-slip flooring, because what happens is every single pen of these cattle is going to exit through the door. So the floor in the pen might be perfect for years, where because they exit through the door, that will wear out more quickly. So you have to keep an eye on the areas where they, like the alley and the doorway, the gate, where the gate is, because those areas might wear out more quickly and need to be replaced.
That's a really, really good point. And the next slide shows a raceway with a very bad reflection. In this particular slaughterhouse, the animals kept backing up because of the reflection. And the way it was fixed was to move an overhead light. We moved an overhead light 3 meters to the side, and this reflection went away. Sometimes a very simple change can make a big improvement. And this particular slaughterhouse had a very high electric prod score because the animals kept backing up. And so it's really important to fix these distractions. The next slide shows the entrance to a cattle stunning box. It has a good non-slip floor, but look at all the shiny reflections. A lot of new equipment is made out of shiny stainless steel. And if you're going to be putting in a new box, order it with the dull finish. Another problem you have in this box is that when the cattle were put in the head holder, they could see all of the activity out on the processing floor. That is bad. It's going to make them balk. The next slide shows a nice flag being used as a driving tool. An electric prod should never be used as a person's primary driving tool. Never. Get electric prodders out of your hands. You can use something else. Another thing we need to be doing is people have got to stop yelling and screaming. Yelling and screaming at cattle on shape and banging on the sides of the fences and making a lot of noise is very stressful to livestock. The next slide shows a plastic paddle, and shows a plastic paddle. And one of the issues that has come up in our slaughterhouses is, when does tapping an animal with a driving aid become beating? Well, I've got an Amazon box right here, and it's empty Amazon box. There's nothing in it. And if I take this box and I tape it all up and I hit it with that paddle, if this box starts to break, tapping has turned into beating. We've had a lot of arguments about when does tapping turn into beating. If an empty cardboard box that you've taped up starts to break when you hit it, then it's beating the animal. You know, because this has been an issue for a lot of discussion. When does tapping the animal become beating the animal? And it's okay to tap an animal, but you cannot be hitting it, and especially in the face. Let's go to the next one.
I want to make a comment about this picture. Notice that the rattle paddle is in perfect shape. Temple and I took this picture back in the early 2000s in Australia. As you can see, the guy's wearing an Australian hat, okay? And his rattle paddle's in good shape. If you go to a plant and you see a rattle paddle all beat up and dissolving, that means they're probably using it too hard. Okay?
Well, another thing is when you find broken rattle paddle handles laying around all shredded, then you know that they are using it wrong.
Using it too hard. This one's beautiful.
Yep, this one's beautiful. That's just great. Now, maybe you might want to talk about the tambourine, since that was one of your.
Okay. I've been going to Nicaragua for about 16 years. All right. And this is one of my favorite tools. In the old days, they used to use a coat hanger and some bottle tops from the beer bottles and the Coke bottles. But now they've got a little more money. So they're using a real tambourine. And this is just a wonderful tool to gently encourage the cattle to move up the chute. And I don't know if it would work with sheep, Temple, but I imagine it could. Okay. But the only place I've ever seen it really used is in Nicaragua, and I'm really proud of them.
Well, and you want to just gently shake it, like,
Yeah, just a gentle shake.
The important thing is for handlers to remain calm. No arm waving. I want to stop this. I want to stop all the yelling. Move your animals really calmly. Also, handlers need to understand the point of balance. The big mistake I see a lot of people make is they stand in front of the head of the animal and take the paddle and they poke the rear. That does not work. You are telling your animal to go forwards and backwards at the same time. If you want an animal in a race to go forward, you've got to be behind the shoulder. Got to be behind the shoulder to make it go forward. And sometimes if you just walk back by them in the opposite direction, as you go by them in the opposite direction, they'll move forward. This is a very simple thing that you can just try. There's some other information online on exactly how to use flight zone and point of balance principles. But the first thing that people have got to do is calm down. These are U.S. Humane slaughter regulations. And this is rather vague: minimize excitement and discomfort. I don't really know what that means. The reason why I came up with the empty cardboard box test was because it's something more objective to show that when tapping becomes beating. If animals are rearing up in the raceway, especially cattle, that's because a person's deep inside the flight zone. What you want to do, back off. If an animal rears up in the race, back away, and get out of the flight zone. Do not push the animal down. That makes it more excited. You just back off. Now we have a scoring system for evaluating animal handling, where you measure falling. More than 1% falls down, you have a problem. We measure use of electric prods. An excellent score would be 5% or less of the animals. And then we also measure vocalization. Mooing, vocalizing in the stun box. And if 5% of the animals vocalize when you catch them in a head holder, that would be a good score. If 20% vocalize, that's a bad score. This just shows an example of a little yellow ribbon that was making the animals stop. That little yellow ribbon just barely moved. You need to go through your facility and look for these kinds of problems. This is an example of changes in the type of flooring. This will make animals stop and refuse to move. This is going into a stun box. Another thing that will make animals stop is air blowing back out through. If they have air blowing in their face, they won't go in. This is an example of putting a light on the entrance of the stunning area, because cattle are afraid of the dark. They do not like going into the dark. So we added this light. That's a simple thing that you can try. It's really important to try a lot of simple things. The first thing I'm going to check, if they refuse to enter the stun box, is air blowing back out. Air in the face, they will stop. They will not go.
And the easy way to check it is just hold up a paper, and if it's going like this, there's air blowing in their face.
That's right.
And when you put the light up, make sure you don't aim it for their face, aim it away from their face, because if it's towards their face, it's like driving into the sunshine. It can be glare, but if you aim it away from their face, they won't even see it, and it'll light up the chute.
Okay, the next slide talks about simple things that you can try if animals are stopping, backing up, turning back. The animal welfare quality system has a measurement of turning back. This is when you're handling out in the yards. Now, I would get a portable light and just try different things. Try the light in different positions. You can take big sheets of cardboard and put it up so they cannot see people walking by. I've been in plants where they saw people walking by. This shows a Jarvis pneumatic stunner. It also shows a piece of cardboard that I put up to block a little crack where the animals could see people. I want to just mention about this stunner. This has 3 parts that you have to maintain: the stunning tool itself, the air supply for the stunning tool that often gets neglected or the pressure is too low, and the balancer, the thing that balances this heavy stunning tool. There's 3 parts, and they all have to be very carefully maintained. We can go to the next slide. Oh, you went the wrong way there.
The wrong way. Sorry, it just did it on its own.
Okay. This is a study of a plant in the U.S., older plant, and they slaughtered dairy cows and older beef cattle, and we had to do 5 simple things to improve the handling. The first thing we did is there was sunbeams coming in through the roof, so that was blocked. Then the cattle could see people up ahead, so we blocked that with a big piece of cardboard. And then in the stunning box, they could see people through the front of the stunning box, so we put up a curtain to block that. And then the next slide shows 2 other things we did. We used the portable light, what I showed earlier. We also had to get the handlers to stop overloading the crowd pen that leads up to the single file race. Good handling requires more walking. And one of the big problems we have is bringing too many, especially cattle, too many cattle up all at once. You need to figure out in your slaughterhouse the correct number of animals to bring up from the lairage, and then make sure that you enforce them. So we did 5 simple modifications of handling procedures and very simple changes to the facility, and it resulted in great improvements. Other things we've had to do to fix plants that had problems is in non-slip floor in the stun box. I've been in many plants where cattle were jumping around in the stun box. We put in a non-slip floor, made a big improvement. This shows just a very nice concrete curved single file race. And the next slide shows a modern curved crowd pen. Now this is laid out so as the cattle come around the bend, they're going back to where they came from. Cattle and sheep have a strong behavior to return to where they came from. Now, correct layout of facilities is essential. I have lots of free information on my website, grandin.com. It's my last name. This is almost my new book on the welfare of the slaughter of farmed animals. The slaughter of farmed animals. It's available on Amazon and on cabby.org. But you have to lay these facilities out correctly. Now, we do not have enough time today to go into all of the explanations. This shows one that's laid out as they come around the bend. Then they're going right up the race. Also, notice they're bringing a very small group, a nice small group of cattle. It is not jammed full. This is one of the things they really have to work on. You'll also notice that you don't have people standing on that catwalk where they would see them. Because if the person was bringing the cattle up and somebody was standing, I don't know if you can see this mouse arrow here, that would cause, if the person stands yeah, right there where Erika is working the arrow, that would cause the cattle to stop. If someone stood there where that arrow is moving, they wouldn't come in. You've got to make sure that people stand in the right place. The next slide shows a sliding gate that's made out of a rubber curtain, so that when you close it, it's not going to hurt the animals. This could be used in a sheep facility because it's just a rubber curtain. And the sheep do not try to go through it because it's a solid barrier. This is an example of using behavior to control animals rather than force. The next slide shows some work that Erika's done where she put cardboard on a facility. Why don't you tell about this particular place here, Erika?
Okay. This happens in a very small slaughter plant, okay, where the animals, there's a stun box and the entire slaughter floor is off to the left here. So they can see the entire floor. So what they did is they put a shower curtain around the front, which they can move once they get into the head restraint. This has like a squeeze chute head restraint. Okay. Once they get into the head restraint, they can move the curtain. But they just took some cardboard and tied it up here with some twist ties. And they found that the cattle and the sheep will move in better, will move into the box better because they can't see the floor. All the people that are sawing and cutting and skinning are all over in here. So this really, really helped. And we're not talking a lot of money here, okay, to make a big difference.
Well, and I would recommend you experiment with the shower curtain and the cardboard. And then when you find out what works, then you're going to replace this with metal, with something more permanent. But it costs nothing to just experiment with this. And you'll be amazed if you put it in the right position, the big difference that it can make. The next slide shows a stun box that's well designed. Now notice that there's a little window that looks out on a blank wall. That actually helps to get them in there because they can see a place to go. But that hole must look out on a blank wall. It must not see out to all the people and activity on the slaughter floor. We can go to the next slide, which shows a handheld captive bolt in a head holder. I'd like to again mention some things about maintenance of these captive bolts. If your cartridges are wet or damp, they will work poorly. They have to be taken apart every day and cleaned and maintained. One of the biggest problems that we've had with these captive bolts is poor maintenance. You have to take care of them. Otherwise, they're just not going to work. And this is something we constantly have to talk about this. Let's go to the next slide. This just shows a really nice stun box. You're using a handheld stunner. I really like this plastic panel. It's a big, thick plastic panel sliding in a track because it's real quiet. There's no metal clankety clank clank. It's important to reduce noise in equipment. Also, if you're operating with air, it should not go shh, 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 because that's going to frighten your animals. This is just really nice design. The next slide is one of Erika's pictures showing a nice head holder. Maybe you have something to say about this because this is your picture here.
This is one in Brazil, and the thing to mention here is that this would be very common for Brazil for a halal type operation where they were either doing the electrical stun or they were doing a mushroom type stun, because there's a panel, there's a chin lift that comes up to hold the head in place for a mushroom stun. And so we can secure that head and get a very accurate mushroom stun to cause a concussion. All right. And very little damage is done, injury to the animal, it secures the animal's neck, but you can see this has rounded corners, and it secures the neck without causing stress on the animal. And it's important that the pressure on these two side holders, that the pressure is controlled so that it cannot pinch or choke that neck. All right. But this shows a head restraint that's very commonly used in countries like South America.
I just want to make a comment that one of the ways you can determine if you have too much pressure, when you put this on, if the animal goes, moo, if he goes, moo, when you apply this head restraint, then it's too tight. They should not, I want to emphasize, not vocalize when you catch them with this head restrainer. The next slide shows a testing device for determining whether or not a captive bolt stunner has sufficient force, has sufficient hitting power. Now, each manufacturer has their own testing device. I strongly recommend this for large plants. The next slide just shows another head holder. That's a picture that I took in Brazil. And you can see the metal plate that comes up under the chin, because it first catches like this, and then the lift comes up under the chin to hold the head up. And they were using captive bolt stunning at this particular slaughterhouse.
I want to make one comment, because because in the halal plants, there's a lot of chin lifts and head holders. If you see your cattle sticking their tongue out like that, they're trying to breathe. That means they're choking. Okay. And they're trying to breathe. They're trying to stick their tongue out so they can get air to pass their tongue. So that's another way you can tell it's too tight.
The other thing is, when you get the animal in this position, you need to stun it immediately.
Very fast.
Animals struggle if they're held too long. You want to go boom, boom, bang with the stunner. Don't wait. This shows a center track belly restrainer. This is a system that I developed for really large plants. They're using a Jarvis pneumatic captive bolt. Now you'll notice in there's a little white curtain, and the purpose of this little rubber curtain is to prevent the next animal in line from seeing this motion of the stunner coming down. It's important that that curtain does not get removed. If it gets torn, then you need to replace it. It's an important detail of procedure. The next slide shows I think, in fact, this is one of Erika's slides on captive bolt stunning. Now, the question that often comes up, and this is penetrating stunning, is the whole issue in halal. It needs to die by the throat cut, not by the stunning. The heart will continue to beat for several minutes after it's been shot in this manner. So if you cut the animal quickly, it will die by the slaughter and not by this. The heart has its own independent nerves for keeping it beating. Go to the next slide. This next slide just shows another picture of some captive bolt stunning. That's a little messy. I think we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, it's important to shoot it in the right position, right in the middle of the forehead. Common mistake that people will make if they don't know is between the eyes. That does not work. And these are just some simple diagrams that you can use to show people the correct position for captive bolt stunning. Now, this next slide shows an animal. That just shows the correct position there for the shape. You can use either one of those positions will work. And the next slide shows a head holder with a non-penetrating captive bolt for cattle. Now, non-penetrating captive bolts are less effective in terms of instantly inducing unconsciousness than penetrating. The research is very clear on this. Penetrating captive bolt does a better job of making that animal instantly unconscious. Now, with a non-penetrator, the exact positioning is really important. Also, the gun has to be absolutely straight. Let me demonstrate here with my book here. Absolutely straight against the head. If it is on an angle, it will not work. It has to be completely straight, like this. It has a much less of a margin of error, and the gun maintenance becomes even more important. Also, you need to bleed within 60 seconds. The next slide just goes over some of the principles. This shows an effective non-penetrating captive bolt. You've got to put a certain amount of force on that head to effectively make it unconscious. But the heart will still continue to beat for several minutes after you have done this. Now, obviously, this was after skinning. We'll go to the next slide.
We're trying to cause a concussion. That's the whole idea. Even with a captive bolt, with a penetrating captive bolt or without, it's the force causing the concussion on the brain that makes them go unconscious, right, Temple?
Yes, and that's why it's so important to have a well-maintained stunner, because it's got to have hitting force. And that is what you measure with that test stand. It will tell you whether or not the gun is hitting with enough force. Non-penetrator must be much more precise positioning. We already talked about that. But in order to reliably make that animal unconscious, you must do damage to the brain. Otherwise, it will not go unconscious. And we can go to the next slide. Where some of the biggest problems with non-penetrating mushroom head not working is large bulls, cattle with thick hair. Now, that's more of a problem with our Hereford breed. You know, the Nelore don't have much hair. You must bleed within 60 seconds. And what all the research is showing is that the penetrating captive bolt is more effective. I would rather have you use the penetrating captive bolt. That is what the science is showing. And since these slides were made, there's been 2 more studies that show that the penetrating is more effective. This next picture,
we may have some countries that have water buffalo, and I don't think the non-penetrating would work on water buffalo.
I would agree with you on that. Totally agree with that. Okay. This shows an animal riding on the center track belly rail restrainer, and this is a system that I developed, and the animal is riding on that. Details of design are really important. Again, this equipment has to be maintained. You have to make sure there's no sharp edges on it. Again, if you have an animal vocalizing when it's held in a restraint device, that's a sign that you have a problem. Now, cattle vocalize when you hurt them. Sheep do not. So you use the vocalization as a way to measure stress in cattle, but not in shape. The next slide just shows a diagram of the whole entire, center track restrainer system. This is used in big plants in the US, Canada, and Australia. Plant would have to do probably more than 120 cattle per hour in order to justify this large piece of equipment. The next slide shows head-only stunning of sheep. And there are different rules in halal. In New Zealand, they do a lot of halal slaughter where they do a head-only stun, which temporarily makes your animal unconscious. It's what's called a stun that can recover. Now, to make an animal unconscious with electricity, you have to cause a grand mal epileptic seizure, where you're going to have a rigid phase like this. This is a rigid phase. And then this is the kicking phase. So you have two phases, a rigid phase, that's the tonic phase, and a kicking phase, which is the clonic phase. You've got to induce a seizure. Now with this head-only stunner, you must bleed within probably 30 seconds. Otherwise, your animal will wake up. The next slide came from Erika, and you might want to talk about that one.
Okay, couple things. We did a study. Kurt Vogel is one of Dr. Grandin's graduate students, and we did a study back in 2010 and determined that you can use a handheld electrical stunner on the head and then on the heart. And again, this gives you more time to bleed before the animal wakes up. All right. Now for halal, I'm not positive that all halal places will accept the heart stun. So if you're doing the head only stun, you need to bleed very quickly because they can wake up very fast. And one thing that's really important with electrical stunning is making sure the animal is wet so that electricity will conduct through the wool. But if you are doing a head heart, this shows an example of where you would put the stunner to be very, very close to the heart.
Okay, let me just explain something. This is what's called a two-step electric stun. You must apply to the head first. Head first to make it unconscious. And then you put it in the heart. Head first, then here. All right, also want to talk about the issue about the heart. With the captive bolt, both penetrator and non-penetrator, the heart will beat for several minutes. If you do a head-only stun, if you do not bleed right away, your animal will wake up and walk around after about 60 seconds. You do this does stop the heart. I just want to explain it. This shows a New Zealand head to back, where they simultaneously pass electricity through the head and the heart to make it unconscious. This kills the lamb. This would probably not be acceptable for halal, where the head only would be. The only reason for showing this is a prepared head in the anatomy lab at a veterinary college. And the purpose of this slide is to show that the brain is not between the eyes. It's a really nice prepared head that I saw on one of my trips. The next slide shows the international minimum amperages for electric stunning. In electricity, I mean, just a little explanation of electricity. Electricity is sort of like water. Amperage is the volume. Voltage is the pressure. And you have to get enough amperage through the head to cause a seizure. Now, I tend to look at the animal and look at it and go, are you causing a grand mal epileptic seizure? Now, this is explained in detail on Grandin.com. It's also explained in detail in my book, Determining the Grand Mal Seizure. But if you're using a stunner with settings lower than this would be a big problem. Let's go to the next slide. This is just another picture of the prepared head, and you can see that the brain is not between the eyes. You know, this sort of picture is useful in training people that are just starting out. The next slide's one of Erika's slides of a restrainer for sheep. Why don't you tell us about this plant?
Okay, I need to say greetings right now because my plant in Quebec, Canada, is watching right now, and they're using this little restrainer, and I've got two pictures of it. There's the front. They're using this for unstunned halal, and Omar can cut about 60 sheep per hour using this little V restrainer. Okay, and they bring the sheep in the back. They guide them into the back, and then Omar performs the cut. Most of the sheep because they're cut very well, all right, and correctly, lose consciousness within a very few seconds, maybe like 6 or 7 seconds. They're completely unconscious. Okay. And he's doing a wonderful job. So I have permission from them to show you these, but this is a really nice little restrainer.
Well, that's just great. The next slide is a picture I took, and it shows electric stunning, one of those pictures I took in New Zealand. Right here on this other picture, they're wetting the animal's head for electric stunning. When you use head-only electric stunning in cattle, you've got to wet the animal to get a really good connection. And some of these systems, it stuns from right behind the neck to the nose. That's the New Zealand system. It goes up here to the nose because you have to pass the current through the head. This other system, it would go from the forehead maybe to the neck. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the next slide shows how do I determine that your animal is unconscious? After you shoot an animal with a stunner or you cut it, you're going to get kicking. And you ignore that kicking. You can get kicking even after you take the head off, because the circuit that causes this kicking motion is in the middle of the spine. It's called the walking circuit. It's in the center of the spine. And when it no longer has control from the brain, it kind of goes crazy and you're going to get kicking. So the part of the animal you've got to look at when you hang it up is the head and the neck. That head and neck should just be floppy, like if it, just floppy. It should flop like a rag. If the tongue is soft and extended, it's unconscious, and there should be no eye reflexes. And one common reflex is menace reflex. I'm going to do the menace reflex on my own picture. No, that didn't work. Wait a minute, I got to do it towards the camera. Okay, that's the menace reflex. You don't touch, but you just go like that up to the eye or like this. And there should be no blinking. Another thing you never want to see is a natural blink. Go out into the lairage. What do cattle and sheep look like when they move their eyes? I do not want to see that on the line. That is a conscious animal. Now this animal, the tail is down because in about 5 minutes, the walking circuit dies. You can shoot an animal with a captive bolt and that destroys the brain instantly. But the nerves in the muscles and the walking circuit takes at least about 5 minutes to die. And when the tail is down, the spine is all the way dead. We can go to the next slide. This is just troubleshooting or problem solving electric stunning. You know, when you have failures in electric stunning, the amperage is too low is a common problem. Another one is poor bleeding. You've got to do a good job of bleeding. You also have to make sure the stunner electrodes are pressed firmly against the animal with water on it. So you get a good connection. You need to make sure that the electrodes stay in firm contact with the animal, that they are not bouncing up and down like this. Correct placement on the animal welfare measuring system. There's two things we measure. We measure the correct placement of the stunner. You do that for captive bolt. You also measure the correct placement for the electric stunner. And then the other problem is on a head only is you do not bleed quickly enough. The next slide, but now we're going to get into some of the religious slaughter issues.
One question was, how long do we electrically stun for? How many seconds?
Well, usually it's just a few seconds, no more than 10 seconds. It takes 3 seconds. It takes 3 seconds to cause the grand mal epileptic seizure. From an animal welfare standpoint, you have to cause a grand mal epileptic seizure. Now let's talk about some of the welfare issues with slaughter without stunning. That is a terminology that is commonly used in Europe. And there's two issues here: how you restrain or hold your animal, and the actual cutting of the throat itself. They're two separate issues. And some of the biggest problems that I have seen with halal slaughter or other religious slaughter is really bad methods being used of how the animal is held. And the next slide shows really terrible restraint method. It's a very old slide of mine. And they were hanging the cattle up by their ankle. You could change the slide. Hanging the animal up by the ankle, and it was vocalizing. They probably had a 100% vocalization score. This was really bad. We're not able to change the slides.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Okay, this is completely bad. You can see it's got its mouth open. It's going, and this is absolutely not acceptable. This is absolutely horrible using this method of restraint. We'll go on to the next slide on OIE guidelines. That's the World Animal Health Organization. This really bad method that I just showed you is against the regulations of the OIE. You're allowed to hang chickens upside down, but not the sheep or the cattle. I was on the original slaughter committee for the OIE. And one of the things I said is that we need to have some bad things that we just say, you do not do. They're really bad things. We should not do it. And I wrote some of this. Let's go to the next slide. Here are other bad things that you do not do. Breaking legs. There have been some really horrible places where they'd cut the leg tendons of cattle to restrain them. That's absolutely not acceptable. You know, this lists the methods that we definitely should not use. Another method is punctila, where you take a knife and stab into the back of the neck. That does not cause unconsciousness. It just paralyzes the animal and it feels everything. These are the very bad methods that should never be used. The next slide shows some very nice head holding devices for slaughter without stunning. And in this particular device, the animal is standing upright. And once you can show on the next slide the restrained position. When you get the animal in this position, you need to make sure you cut it right away. Do not let it, do not let this animal stand there fighting that restrainer. Yes, I can give you the name of a person that makes that. It's called Turnkey Welding in LaSalle, Colorado. Turnkey Welding, LaSalle, Colorado, makes this system. But you want to do the cut. The next picture shows a head holding device on the end of a center track belly rail restrainer. A question I'll often get asked is, how does the animal react to all this? The next slide shows blood on the restrainer. How does the animal react to having blood all over the restraint device? I find there's very little problems. They'll walk in quietly, provided there's never been a stressed animal in there. If you have an animal get stuck in a device, maybe get down, stuck there for 15 minutes, he will slobber on it and you will get a stress substance and the next animals will not come in until you wash it up. A calm animal doesn't seem to have much reaction. The next slide shows a kosher knife. And I want to do a little demonstration here with knives. You got to have a sharp knife. So I looked around my kitchen, and this is what I call the paper test. You take a regular piece of just a regular piece of printer paper, just a regular paper like this. This is a terrible knife. It just tears the paper. It's a really, really awful knife. All right, now I do have one that's sharper. So I hold my paper and I do it just right. This is not the best knife. A really good knife will work even better than this. You got really a good knife, but this one's somewhat better, but it's not real good. So I've gotten a horrible knife here, and this is a poor knife. But you can see here how there was some differences. See, this one will start to cut the paper. But if you've got a really good knife, you can just hold it like this and just go shh. So I got like horrible and poor. But the paper test is a really easy way of testing whether or not a knife is sharp. And that happens to be one of the kosher knives, and having a very sharp knife is important. This just shows a diagram of a upright restrainer. Now you'll notice in front of it, there's a barrier. Erika has talked about that. And you can see a little light up there, and that light helps get the animal in there. They will not stick their head into something that looks like just a dark place because they are afraid of the dark. So this shows the correct way to do it. The next slide shows a picture I got off the internet. This is a very nice restraint box, very good restraint box, but there's no barrier. It is looking out onto the slaughter floor where it can see all the activity. The next picture I got, this is a picture I actually took in Brazil. I took that about 2 years ago of a rotating box. I would prefer using the upright box. It's much cheaper too. But again, we can do the vocalization scoring. This actually had a really low vocalization score. The next slide just shows a diagram of a rotating box. Then we can go on to some welfare tips for your operation. A basic principle is a calm animal will lose sensibility more quickly after slaughter without stunning than an excited animal. A fast knife stroke is more effective, and you need to perform the throat cut immediately after you restrain it. Don't let it wait. Now let's look at, on the next slide, some of the research on, oh wait a minute, maybe we got another slide put in there. Your vocalization score in cattle should be 5% or less.
With a head restraint. With a head restraint.
Cattle in the head restraint. And you score each animal as silent or vocal. He either went, or he did not. You need this knife right here. This would be a horrible knife for cattle. Horrible knife. Because it's way too short.
And it's curved.
And
the flat knife works better. The straight knife works better.
Well, the one that they used in kosher, it's about this long. It's about that long, and it goes all the way across the neck and doesn't dig into the neck. Where regular meat slaughterhouse knives, way too short. Another big problem is pushing animals too hard with the back pusher gait. Erika's done some work on that. You might want to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, couple of things. I've visited a lot of religious slaughter plants, all right? And one of the things that we have found is that when you situate the animal into the box and you use a rear pusher gait to hold it in place and you stretch the neck, that body is restrained against the chest is restrained and that neck is restrained. So a lot of times when you make the cut, you are actually causing a tourniquet so the blood is not coming out. So you need to make sure that when you have the animal situated in place, that you either cut and release quickly, or if you can, release before you cut. Things like the rear pusher. Once you get the head in place, if you can loosen the rear pusher a little bit and then make the cut, you're more likely to get a rapid bleed. The other thing that is so critical is making sure you have a sharp knife and making sure that you steel the knife, that you straighten the blade all day long. You should be doing that after every 1 to 2 cattle, after every 1 to 2 sheep, you should be straightening that blade and you should be sharpening it religiously, okay? So that we get a good cut, and then we release all of the body restraint immediately after the cut so that we can let all the blood flow.
Okay, the next slide shows the difference between using good methods and poor methods in cattle. You do really good methods with slaughter without stunning, they will collapse. When an animal loses the ability to stand, it is going unconscious. It's called loss of posture, scientific literature. And so on an upright box, what was being measured here was time to losing the ability to stand. Good technique, they will go unconscious much more quickly compared to bad technique. And you can measure time to collapse. There's a big difference between a lot of difference between the animals, and you can keep score on this. And then you can tell, am I getting better at how I'm doing my procedure, or am I getting worse? I cannot emphasize enough the importance of measurement. You have to be measuring.
The other thing you could measure, if you cannot see what we call the loss of posture, if you cannot see the animal actually fall after the cut, you can watch the eye roll. When they lose consciousness, the eye rolls back like they're fainting, and their ears, instead of being alert, their ears go back too. So you can watch that eye roll. And it's difficult to see in black cattle, but it's much easier to see in white cattle and brown cattle, because you can see their eye roll. Okay. And again, typically, if you've got excellent technique, a sharp knife, minimal restraint, most animals lose consciousness in like 13 to 22 seconds, and it averages about 17. We have years and years of data saying that. And the longest time was 38, and 94% collapsed within 30 seconds. And the ones that didn't were gone within 38 seconds.
Well, the other test,
that's when everything's right,
is the menace reflex, where you go to the eyes. Now, this menace reflex, and I'm doing menace reflex on my computer camera. So if my computer camera was the eye, I'm doing the menace reflex, I'm not touching it. Now, this works really well in an upright box because you'll have no blood in the eye. Well, if they're in a rotating box, you get blood in the eye, and then the menace reflex is not very accurate because you can't see. There's a very important principle. Sheep, due to differences in their anatomy, will lose consciousness more quickly than cattle. Everything that Erika was telling you was about cattle. And in sheep, all of the blood vessels are in the front of the throat. So when you cut it, the entire blood supply to the brain is cut off. Cattle have a vertebral arteries in the back of the neck. So when you cut the throat, there is still some blood supply going to the brain. And this slide is sort of a compilation of a bunch of research studies. But sheep will lose consciousness faster than cattle. This is a basic principle in it, and it's due to differences in the anatomy. There's also a big difference here between good and bad technique. We can go to the next slide. A big question in animal welfare is, does cutting the throat actually hurt? So we have the issue of the time to go unconscious. So if you do good technique, when there's no stunning, they go unconscious more quickly, but it's not instantaneous. Slaughter without stunning is never instantaneous. There is going to be a period of time before they become unconscious. Does it hurt? Now, Grandin 1994, this was a plant that I worked with. We actually had a custom designed upright box, really good controls on it. I ran the box perfectly. And we had the best rabbi that there was. His name was Moshe. So when we did perfect technique, the cattle were brought up very calmly. I very gently put them in the box, held them very gently. Moshi went right in there and cut them. There was very little reaction. There was less reaction than if I just got in their face in the flight zone. There was very little reaction. But I want to emphasize this was perfect conditions, because the problem with slaughter without stunning is if you get sloppy, welfare gets bad very quickly. And that's both in the operation of the restrainer and of the cutting. And so I want to emphasize that the Grandin 1994 observations were done under perfect conditions. And to do slaughter without stunning with an adequate level of welfare requires tremendous attention to details of the procedure. So I'm in favor in most cases of stunning them, because it's a whole lot easier to have good welfare. Now, Gibson did a study where they looked at an EEG method that could detect pain, and he found that it did hurt, but they did not use the right knife. It may have been too short. It may have been way too short. But this study shows that if you use the wrong knife, it definitely does hurt. And there's been some more new studies that have come out. And I think a lot of them were done under less than ideal conditions. Let's go on to the next slide.
Temple, here's a quick question.
Okay.
How many seconds does it take a camel to lose consciousness?
I don't know. Maybe you can answer that.
I don't know either.
But basically what you've got to do is do the same thing we've done on the cattle and sheep. You can
Just
measure this.
Get a stopwatch and measure.
You're going to have to get a stopwatch and measure. And then you start to see, well, good technique, he'll go unconscious in less seconds than with bad technique. We just have to measure it. Another thing that's going to affect it is position of the cut. Cutting close to the vertebrae, close to the skull. Cutting in this position will go more unconscious quicker than cutting way back here. Cutting here.
Good point. Good point.
That also affects how quickly they go unconscious. There's been a bunch of research on that by a person named Neville Gregory. And all of this research is reviewed on, a lot of it's on Grandin.com. It's also in my new slaughter book. Now, here's another study that showed that there probably was some pain, but there was no knife description. I do not know in this study what they used to cut them. You see, this is really important research, is looking at methods. I review a lot of journal articles, and I would have asked them, you must describe what knife you used, because whatever they used, it was bad. This just shows a prototype of a real simple little restrainer. Now, this is a prototype in a lab to show that the belly position was low stress. This is some of the original research that was used to validate using the center track restrainer, and that this position is a low stress position. This research was done in the 70s, and here's just another a little restrainer that somebody just made for holding a sheep for either halal or kosher slaughter. And the next slide shows New Zealand. This is a New Zealand head-only operation. It was put in the head holder, just the head was stunned. And then it was rolled out and then very quickly bled. Very quickly, within just 2 or 3 seconds, it was bled. This is a New Zealand head only. This is just some review. Head only, you have to bleed really quickly. And you have to, one thing that I do when I do a welfare audit is they've got to demonstrate to me that the settings on that electric stunner can create that ground mal seizure, where I start with a rigid phase like this. That's the rigid phase. And then they go into a tonic phase. If the stunner is not capable of creating a clear rigid phase and then a kicking phase, it may be just paralyzing the animal. And then some systems, they have a system to freeze the carcass. That has to be turned off. Now, this is a place where we have a zero tolerance. An animal must be bled out and dead before you cut off its feet, Okay, scalding, that's done in chickens before it goes into the scald water. The feathers are taken off. You skin part of it. It must be dead before you start invasive, definitely would be painful procedures of dressing out the carcass. In chicken, if you have a uncut red bird come out of the scalder, you have just scalded a chicken alive. Uncut red bird, you're going to be failing a welfare audit. Okay, Erika, why don't you talk about this?
All right.
This is a pushback that you worked with.
We're going to talk about making money. So I hope I have everybody's attention. One of the things that happens almost every place we go where you have doors and restrainers is I go look for bruising. Now I'm going to show a short video. Hopefully this will work. And this is a pusher. This is a rear pusher. All right. It works just fine on that particular animal. Okay. However, this animal was almost twice as big. Okay. So if that rear pusher is intended to be pushing a bigger animal, and the operator operates it exactly the same as he would for a small animal, this is what happens. The tail gets injured, the skin is removed from the rear of the round or the rear leg, okay? And this very large bull vocalized "Woo!" when he went in there because the rear pusher was pushing so hard that it injured him. Now, what everybody will tell me when we see these bruises, oh, this happened on the farm. This happened during transport. No, I've heard this animal vocalize. I watched the rear pusher injure this animal. All this meat gets cut off, okay? All this meat gets removed because of the bruising. You cannot sell this meat. You cannot sell this bruised meat. So if you want to make money, count the number of kilos of bruises that you remove. Listen for the animals vocalizing in your restraint and determine why are they vocalizing. Okay, is somebody slamming a door on them? Is somebody pushing the rear pusher too tight? When this incident happened, we immediately went to the operator, and the good news was he could adjust the controls instantly. He did not have to do the controls the exact same amount for a big animal and a small. He just wasn't thinking about it. Once we explained it, guess who made more money? The entire plant. Okay, Temple, you manage what you measure.
Yeah, I want to just talk a little bit about stun box doors. A study done by Carmen Gallo in Chile showed stun box rear gate slamming down. You also need to make sure that you engineer your controls so that when the operator pushes the button to make the door go up, it goes up. A badly designed control, your door will keep coming down and then go up. And that's a problem with the engineering that needs to be fixed. When he pushes the button or pushes the lever to make the door go up, it needs to respond instantly and go up. Otherwise, you will get bruising. Okay, now we're going to talk about auditing and measuring. Maintaining high standards requires continuous measuring. It's just like traffic out on the road. If the police did not measure speed with their electronic equipment, you'd have a racetrack out there. They have to keep measuring it. They also measure drunk driving with the breathalyzer test. It's a measurement. And one of the ways to maintain quality handling with good welfare is to be auditing using numerical scoring. We already talked about scoring falls, vocalization, electric prod use. We can also score the quality of the stunning. Another thing is we must avoid vague language, because if you write a guideline or regulation that says handle cattle properly, one person's idea of proper may be another person's idea of terrible. It's not clear. This is the reason why I came up with, okay, here's my Amazon box again. Okay, he's smiling now, and he's smiling because nobody has hit him. That's why he's smiling. Because you've got to have clear guidance. And so that if I interpret the guideline or somebody else has interpreted the guideline, it's going to be the same. So we can have a guideline like vocalization. I can measure that in the head restrainer. And if I have 30% of the cattle mooing in the head restrainer, I've got a problem. And this is a very nice picture that Erika took. And all of the animals must have enough space to be able to lie down without being on top of each other. That's a clear guideline.
Okay, and this is a picture. Okay, if you have a water trough in this, you tell me how this white cow here is going to get to a water trough over there, because I'm telling you right now, there's no way she's ever going to get there. They have to be able to stand up, lie down, and reach the water. And when I look into a pen to see how full it is, this is one that fails miserably, okay?
Well, at least they're able to lay down. It's
well, no, they're not laying down, Temple. They're standing up in this one.
Up? Okay, all right. Okay, I looked at this picture wrong. It wasn't one of my pictures. They're standing.
No, it's terrible.
It's way too overcrowded. Way.
Yeah, this is really bad. Yeah.
It's way too.
They couldn't even lie down if they wanted to.
Okay, well, and that brings up another factor with overloading of trucks. You overload trucks. One of the big problems is if you get an animal down, then it can't get back up again because the other cattle close in over it. Okay, this shows the standard scoring system that we use in North American guidelines for animal handling and stunning. You can get that off of a website, animalhandling.org. You count. Can I effectively stun 95% of the cattle with a single shot? And when I first started doing audits a number of years ago, people had a real difficult time actually doing this. And the biggest problem was stunner maintenance. If you really want excellent score on electric prod use, you need to get it down to 5%. It's important to get electric prods out of people's hands. Falling down needs to be under 1%. Vocalization, we've done a lot of discussing about that, but you measure these different variables. And right now, the trend in Europe on animal welfare assessment is to use what's called an animal-based outcome measure. And this scoring system is an outcome-based measure. I'm not telling you how to build a stun box, but it has to achieve certain outcomes. We can go to the next slide. Okay, this is our Humane Slaughter Act. The way our law is written, it says that captive bolt stunning has to be perfect. If we actually go out and measure it, we've got plants right now that are running 99%, 99.5%, really, really, really good. And that's a level that it can be maintained at that level. Not perfection, but it can be maintained at a very high level. We can go on to the next slide. This just shows the system for shape. The first thing is correct placement. Now you're putting the electrodes on the head, and then you're putting them in the correct position. So we score on this particular shape or cattle, were the electrodes put on in the correct position. Now hot wanding, what that is if the animal vocalizes when you applied the stunner, you've energized it, before it's in firm contact. You'll use that on cattle, but not on sheep. Sheep, they'll vocalize out in the layer age, but they do not vocalize when you hurt sheep. That's because they're the defenseless prey species animal, and they don't want to advertise to the predators that they're hurt. You have to get all of your animals unconscious in shape. The OIE says no electric prods. Our guideline is allowing 5%. Another thing you must never do with sheep is pick them up by the wool. You will get tremendous bruising if you do that. Never pick sheep up by the wool or grab them by the wool. Falling down 1%, and then you don't use the vocalization scoring for shape. You use it for, definitely would use it for cattle. Let's go to the next slide. Now I've found on looking at different box designs, upright versus rotating, both of them are capable of getting a good vocalization score of 5% or less. But when things go wrong, like too much pressure on the neck, squeezing the neck like this, you'll get 23%, get a high score. Anytime you squeeze an animal too hard with a restraint device, your vocalization score will get very high. Or in this other place, 47% vocalization, very bad, and they were using electric prods on just about every single animal. So again, very big difference here between the worst operations and the good ones. Okay, we've already talked about not using vocalization scoring on sheep. The OIE, we discussed that. Captive bolt and electric scoring is scored the same way for all species. You know, I don't care if it's a camel, you would still score these things the same way. Also, this looks at directly observable events. It's not a paperwork audit. One of my big concerns in welfare around the world is some people turn it into a paperwork audit. So they're just going in and looking at stunner maintenance records. Yeah, stunner maintenance records that might be fake. No, the auditor needs to go out there and take the guns apart and see if they are maintained. And I do a lot of work with supply chain management. I've done a lot of work with McDonald's. Erika has also done a lot of work with McDonald's. And we've implemented this scoring system in different supplier plants. And a good system has an internal welfare officer or quality assurance person that does this scoring either once a day or once a week. Then McDonald's will hire a third-party auditing company, independent auditing company to do it. And then also the McDonald's buyers also do it. So there's three different parts of this. Now, each one of these things is scored per animal. Did it fall? Yes or no. Was it poked with an electric prod? Yes or no. Was the stunner placed correctly? Yes or no. It's per animal. It's very, very simple. So a question I get asked, well, what if one animal moves 5 times? That's still scored as one animal. Very, very simple. Go on to the next slide. This auditing system is very simple. I have found that to implement things out in the field, you have to have simple guidelines. Normally, in very large plants, we'd score 100 animals. In very small plants, let's say a little plant that does 5 cattle a day, well, then I'm going to just score those 5 cattle, but then I would keep a running average over a period of time and see what my average score is. You know, in a lot of the plants that Erika and I have been in, they usually score 1 hour of production. And we can go to the next slide. I'm going to just do some of the questions. Okay, we discussed, is he silent or was he vocal? We score all of the animals that moo in the stun box, period. They moo in the stun box, it counts. Or if it's a slaughter without stunning, they're in that restrainer and they vocalize, it's counted. And again, you do not score it for shape because they are defenseless prey animal. It doesn't tell you when they're getting hurt. How do you score electric prods? Okay, let's just pretend that this is an electric prod. Well, if they touch the animal with the electric prod, I score it, because I cannot tell if it's turned on. So if the electric device touches, then I score it. Well, and putting it on the shoulder is really bad. This is another mistake people make. You have to use the electric prod. You pick it up on the top of the rear end. Sometimes you do have to use it. That's preferable to breaking tails. That's another thing that's been added to the OIE guidelines, that breaking tails, that's active abuse. You do acts of abuse, that's a failed audit. Things like slamming gates on purpose on animals, dragging live animals, running animals over the top of other animals on purpose, those are acts of abuse. If the body touches the floor, it's a fall. Now, there's some plants that routinely shoot every animal twice with a captive bolt. So how do I score that? I need to look at it to determine whether it's insensible before you do the second shot. I've just got to look at that animal. We can go on to the next slide. Now, a good system has what's called inter-observer reliability. So if I audit the plant, or Erika goes and audits the same plant, or the manager audits, we get pretty close to the same score. That's called inter-observer reliability. And the numerical scoring system is really good on inter-observer reliability. So different people are getting the same score. That's important. Where if you have a guideline with a vague words like handle them properly, you're going to get very, very different scores from different people. Let's go to the next slide. This just shows some of our humane slaughter regulations. We have a very strong regulation against dragging non-ambulatory downed animals. It's absolutely prohibited. If you have an animal in the lairage, go down, you've got to get the stunner, stun it, and then you can drag it. You got to shoot it out in the yards. And that's the same thing for the OIE. Their rules are the same on that. This just shows some of the actual scores from data collected from audits done by various buyers in the US. 97, 98%. You can do better than that now. This slide's a little old. There's some companies that are running 99%. The vocalization, yeah, a lot of companies are running 3 to 5%. Falling down, it's actually way lower. It might be 1 in 1,000 for cattle. And electric pride use, a lot of plants have that right around 15% for cattle. Some plants even lower. But these are scores that commercial plants have been able to just maintain over a period of time. And we can go to the next slide. And this just shows, some scores for stunner placement. Easy. I've been in sheep plants where it was almost 100% they were putting the stunner on correctly. Very seldom vocalized, used no electric pride use. It's possible to get very good scores. But it's very important to keep measuring these things, because if you don't measure it, it can slip back into rough, bad practices, and people don't know it. I call that bad becoming normal. We've got to make sure that doesn't happen. Let's go to the next slide.
I'm not sure we mentioned the hot wanding. The hot wanding, if you have an electrical stun for sheep or cattle for that matter, if you energize the electricity before you make contact with the animal and the animal feels the electricity, it makes a noise. It moves, or it makes a noise, okay? And that's called hot wand, and we would only want to have 1 out of 100 maximum of 1%.
Well, that's a really good plant. I've been in plants where they didn't have 1 out of 1,000.
1 out of 1,000, yeah.
They're doing such a good job.
Yeah, okay.
The principle of this system is you have to figure out what's the important thing to measure. And you're measuring a small number of critical control points. And the good thing about vocalization scoring is it measures a lot of different things that go wrong. It could vocalize due to an electric prod. It could vocalize due to a gate slammed on it. Vocalize due to too much pressure on the head holder. Vocalize because the stunner did not work. That makes it a really good critical control point because it measures a multitude of problems, because you've got to have a simple system. Let's look at traffic. There's only 5 things I really need to measure for traffic safety. That's drunken driving, that's speeding, stopping at red lights and stop signs, texting, and seat belts. If I only enforced those 5 things, I would get 95% of my public safety, because those are the critical control points for traffic. This is the same thing. And a plant has to pass on all 5 of the measures: stunning, insensibility, vocalization, prods, and falls, to pass an audit. Now we have a lot of plants using remote video auditing. And since COVID happened, it's been getting harder and harder to do in-person audits. So they're doing some of the in-person audits with a video camera they strap on a person that goes to a cloud server, and they have the person walk around and show them stuff. Now, I would trust that for a plant I was very familiar with. I would not trust that for a plant that I'd never been in, or I didn't know the layout. But for about 10 years, we've had auditing companies regularly scoring and monitoring the unloading area, the crowd pen area, and the stun box area. And it's important that these cameras have a service looking at them, because you just put cameras in and the managers forget to look at them. They have to be on a scheduled system of people looking at them and doing the scoring.
I want to mention one thing about this. Not only does it show the camera temple, but this also shows 2 mirrors. One mirror, the operator can look and see when the animal enters the stun box, so he can stay out of the way when the animal's entering the stun box. The other mirror is used so he can see what's happening when it drops out into the shackle area. So if he needs to go down and re-stun, he can watch what's happening down there, or see a signal from the operator down in the shackle that he needs to come re-stun.
Well, that's good.
Really good best practice.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, these are just some examples of things that could cause a problem with poor stunning scores. Lack of employee training. With your big, heavy pneumatic stunners, they've got to be hung on the balancer correctly. Your balancer has to be working. They've got to be hung correctly. Damp cartridges. Do not store cartridges, handheld stunners, out in the lairage. They will get damp. You need to bring out each day just the ones you're going to use. Electric prod use. Some of the things that cause that is, constant balking at the stun box. They refuse to go in. Then you need to fix the things that are making them balk. A slippery floor in the stun box. Cattle will be jumping all around like this because they're doing little tiny slips. They're doing little slips like this, and it makes them crazy. I've gone into a plant and just fixed the floor, one little place on the floor, to stop that slipping, and the animals calmed right down. The problem you've got with flooring is it wears out gradually. So it gradually gets worse, and people don't notice unless they measure it. We've already talked about not enough amperage, and we've talked about poor maintenance. I just can't say that enough. These are some of the things that can cause stunning to fail. Okay, this would be other more unacceptable stunning stuff. I think we pretty well discussed that. That's the same slide. Now, vocalization, excessive pressure from the restraint device. Erika showed her slides of the pusher gate. It was actually injuring the cattle. That slaughterhouse probably had a very high vocalization score. Now in shape, in the V restrainer, it's very important that both sides of that restrainer run at the same speed, because if they run at different speeds, you stretch the skin. animals constantly stopping, backing up, then you've got to fix the problem. Air blowing in the face, that may make them back up. Lighting, seeing people, people standing in the wrong place. If animals constantly stop and back up or stop and turn around, you need to figure out what is causing that and fix it. And oftentimes it's something very simple like lighting, or they bring too many up at a time. That can get cattle all turned around in the crowd pen, and then you have to use a lot of electric prods. Animals constantly stop and back up. You need to fix the problem. Okay, you can change it. Now, this just shows how our industry improved when I worked on starting the McDonald's and Wendy's audits in the US. It was a long time ago. But what this shows is when I did my initial baseline, it was very bad back in 1996. Only 30% of the plants could shoot dead 95% of the cattle. Then as soon as a large buyer started auditing, things gradually improved very quickly. But you have to keep maintaining it. It's just like the traffic. The police have to be out there all the time measuring the speed. Now, another thing we've learned is that if you start with a plant that's never been audited before, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And so they're gonna fail. And then you have to give them time to fix their problems because they have to learn that using an electric prod, for example, on every animal is not acceptable, something they should not be doing. Let's go to the next slide. So how were these levels originally set? What I did is I collected baseline data and I put it where the top 25% of the slaughterhouses could pass it. And on farms, some of the things that you can measure on lameness in dairy cattle, for example, dirtiness of chickens is another thing that you can measure. And you're going to have to give farms time to correct their problems. But that's based on audit and inspection data from many different places. And there's many animal welfare indicators on the farm that we can measure at the plant. For example, lameness, difficulty walking, dirty animals, bruising. Some of that is happening not at the slaughter plant. I can look at the insides of animals, parasites, liver abscesses. There's a lot of things I can monitor at the plant to correct things at the farm. You can also use scoring as a problem-solving tool. Do I have a problem with the handling equipment in my plant or in my corrals, or do I have a problem with how the people handle the animals? So the first thing I'll do is I'll train the people in some principles like flight zone and point of balance. And then I'll see, are the cattle or the sheep stopping in this system? Then I have to fix what's causing them to stop, maybe the reflection. And then I can then tell if something's getting better or it's not getting better. Okay, there was a question there concerning a minimum time in the corral. I'm going to assume that that's talking about the lairage. It's good to give cattle, when you unload them, an opportunity to just calm down. Some regulations requiring an overnight lairage. We're finding with grain-fed beef that that's not such a good idea, but it is important to give an animal a chance to just settle down for 1 or 2 hours because there's some stress just going on the truck, getting off the truck. And in this, I also did some work where I looked at plants where there was a lot of balking and stopping, a lot of stopping, a lot of backing up, and a plant where there was a very low level of stopping and backing up. And the vocalization score was much higher in the plant where many animals stopped because people had to poke it with the electric prod. So then I need to fix whatever is causing all these animals to stop. We've already discussed some of those things. Let me go on to the next slide. It's really important to get right down into the restrainer and see what are your animals seeing through this restrainer. Now, right here, they can see people. They can see people through this. They're not going to go in. I also want to show you on the next slide, air blowing in the face. They had 4.5% vocalizing because people had to use the electric prodder. I changed the air movement and it went down to 0%. So I can also use the scoring to measure where I've got a problem. And then if I fix it, are the scores better? This just shows some more examples of using scoring. I had 8% vocalizing due to stopping and balking at the restrainer entrance. I put on a light, it went down to 0%. Another place, the restrainer had no false floor. The animals could see down 2-meter drop off. I made a false floor and I went from 9% down to 0. And then the last bar graph was pressure on the neck, too much pressure. I reduced the pressure. I went from 23% vocalizing down to 0%. So this just shows a before and after. I've already showed that light before. You've seen that. I can also identify animals that are hard to handle. One of the big problems you can have is animals that have been handled on a horse, maybe very calm and nice on a horse. Then they get to a slaughterhouse and they see their first person walking, and they've never seen that before. And they can get really wild. That can be dangerous. And animals need to learn how to go in and out of pens with people walking before they go to a slaughterhouse. And this just shows some normal cattle and some hard to handle bad cattle. And the problem that you can have with cattle that have never been handled with people walking is you put them in a pen and they come right back over the top of you because they're trying to get away from you. So the behavior is that go back to where they came from, and there's been some people killed by this. So you get animals that are really difficult to handle. We've got to correct some issues back on the farm. And you can also use objective scoring. In fact, our beef quality assurance has the same scoring system. Electric prod use, falling, vocalization. They also have running in there as a score, and then miscaught by the head restrainer. That's used in our beef quality assurance. And many people are measuring their handling out on the farm. And then they can tell, am I getting better at my handling? Or am I getting worse? And this slide just shows the measurements you can use at the farm. And you can see that it's pretty much the same. Animals that run into things, animals that run. These are things I can measure. Am I getting better? Am I getting worse? And we go to the next slide. And go to the next. Now there's two kinds of criteria. What we're using with these numbers is what the Europeans call an animal-based measure. It's a measurable. Okay, I'm calling this numerically scored. It's the same thing, but it's an animal-based numerical outcome measure. I'm not telling you how to build the corrals. Then you have practices that are just prohibited. For example, breaking tails, throwing, picking up sheep and throwing them, grabbing sheep by the wool, dragging live animals, slamming gates on purpose on animals, cutting the hoof off of a live animal, things that you just never do. And the older way of doing welfare auditing was to look at what's called an input or resource-based standard, where I tell you exactly how to build the lineage, the trend now in welfare, or I tell you exactly how to build a head restrainer. No, I'm going to measure the outcome. If you are causing a high percentage of cattle to vocalize with that head restrainer, then you need to change it. And we also need record keeping, and record keeping is important. But I'm concerned that some places they're turning everything into a record keeping and a paperwork audit, and people are really good at making fake records. So I want to put the emphasis on the things I can directly observe using these numerical outcome-based measures. And that's the terminology that the Europeans are using. They'll also call it measurables. These are things that you can put numbers on. And we can go to the next slide. All right, these are things I can measure some of these things. I can measure at the slaughterhouse to monitor conditions at the farm. Body condition score. This is really skinny animals. This would be mainly a problem in breeding cows. Lameness, difficulty walking, filthy, dirty animals covered in mud, injuries. Dairy cows get injuries on their legs, eye problems, coat condition. Okay, and some of the organic, they're not using any medicine to prevent lice. So hair falling out, which is not shedding, where they get bald, is not okay. You could measure eye damage in chickens, heat stress. If cattle in the lairage are breathing with the mouth open, and they're doing that, they're about ready to die from heat stress. But open mouth breathing in cattle at rest is heat stressed animals. And now let's look at lameness or difficulty walking. This is an example of a very serious welfare issue where many different problems at the farm can cause the cattle to be lame. One is poor leg conformation. When you just select cattle for beef production traits, you tend to select for poor legs, legs that are too straight, feet that are bent too much like this. And then your animal is going to have problems with walking. Because when you select just for meat, I like to look at an animal as a country. And I've got sort of a genetic national budget. And if I put the entire budget into the economy, which would be meat or milk, then I don't have enough money for the infrastructure, that'd be the skeleton and reproduction. I also may not have enough genetic budget for the military. That would be the immune system. But leg conformation is a genetic problem. Then you could have lameness due to living on rough concrete. In dairy cattle, maybe they do their hoof trimming wrong or they don't do it. Feeding way too much grain can cause lameness problems. Growing animals very rapidly. Poorly designed stalls for dairy cattle, and beta agonists. They are growth promotants that are not antibiotics. But the problem here is pushing the biology too hard, and then the animal breaks down. I can push it too hard with genetics. I could push it too hard by feeding too much grain and no roughages or hay, or I could push it too hard with a drug or a growth promotant. You know, those are like three different ways I could push biology really hard and get problems. But if you push biology too hard, then I'm going to get problems, such as difficulty walking. Another thing that can happen in fat beef cattle, if they're pushed too hard, is die in the feed yard a week before slaughter. You have zero weight gain now. He's dead. That was a big mistake. Okay, here are practices that the OIE prohibits: blinding animals, that's like poking their eyes out, cutting tendons, putting animals that can't stand on a trailer, transporting a cow that's going to calve on a truck. That's absolutely unacceptable. Baby calves, dragging and throwing animals. These are things these are bad things that nobody should be doing. And we can go on to the next slide. There's some input standards you need. We need to have some minimum space requirements on the truck, ammonia levels on the farms. But if you have high ammonia levels, you're going to get eye damage. Basically, if I go into a chicken house out on the farm and my eyes water from the ammonia, it's way too high. And it's over the limit for human safety. And so there's a few things where I have to specify an input rather than outcome. This just to emphasize again the importance of sort of the critical control point approach. Now let's see how good you are at observation. Now I have no way of asking you to vote, but I want to find out how many of you saw that animal was not walking on the sunbeam. They were avoiding walking on the sunbeam. That's the sort of thing that I want you to see, is that they were not walking on the sunbeam. Yeah, you need to be a good observer. And then we can go on, I think, to the final slide. Okay, wait a minute. Still got a few more slides here.
Yep, just a couple.
Okay, and in auditing the lameness, one real simple way to do it is you can score an animal as either lame or not lame. Now, out on the farm, I probably would score, probably a 4-point system where I'd go normal walking, lame but keeps up with the walking herd, mobile but does not keep up with the walking herd, and then practically a downer, can barely walk. But we've got to have some simple things that we can measure. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this is when we're doing inspection reports, whether it's a government inspector, it is an abattoir welfare officer, or maybe a buyer, and you see something wrong. It's very important to have a clear written comment. Do not write rough handling. I don't know what you mean. The handler threw a goat across a room. That would be an example of a clear write-up of what they did wrong. Because when audits are failed, and I've worked with many large buyers, that's been the place I've worked with the most, we have to decide what we're going to do to a plant. We're going to take him off the supplier list. Now he's going to have to do a re-audit, but I have to find out what they did wrong. And when they say rough handling, I don't know what they did wrong. And that's my book, The Slaughter of Farm Animals. And if you have access to Amazon.com, they have it. And I think now we're going to be doing some questions, I hope. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Erika and everybody in Brazil for getting my slides translated. Erika added a lot of really good pictures to the slides because she's worked with many, many plants in Central America. Right now, because of COVID, we're not doing any traveling. So we have to travel by video conference.
We can reach more people this way.
That's right.
Okay.
Muito bom. Bom, a gente continua aqui então no nosso webinar. Obrigada aí pela audiência de todo mundo. E claro, né, gostaria de elogiar mais uma vez o trabalho da doutora Temple Grandin, como da doutora Erika Voogd aqui conosco, e mostrando e demonstrando em detalhes, muito tecnicamente, muito habilidosas, né, toda a experiência aí dessas décadas, né, e por várias regiões, vários países, trouxeram exemplos muito significativos da Nova Zelândia, por exemplo, e de outras regiões aí pelo mundo. Então, mais uma vez, parabéns, de fato, pelo trabalho de vocês. Inclusive, deixa eu pontuar aqui a nossa audiência, quase 400 pessoas ao vivo conosco, de várias partes do mundo. Estivemos aqui, claro, uma grande audiência do Brasil, também da Nova Zelândia, da África do Sul, de Omã, da França, Colômbia, México, Chile. Muito obrigada aí pela audiência de vocês. E, claro, muitos elogios aí e questões também. Entre alguns elogios, Mariana Tavares, estudante de zootecnia da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, em Porto Alegre, conosco. A Ana Walcher, da Walcher Comex. A Margarete Delbianchi, ela que é professora de Patologia e Sanidade do curso de Medicina Veterinária na Unipinhal. E agora já colocando algumas questões nessa nossa primeira rodada, tá bom? Uma questão que vem do professor de Tecnologia de Carnes e Derivados, o Alfredo Fernandes, e ele pergunta o seguinte: sendo uma pistola pneumática, a injeção de ar poderia levar resíduos de cérebro para a circulação e ocasionar uma possível transmissão do prion da BSE?
I can answer that. That method was banned in the US, completely banned. You should not be doing that. It can push brain matter down into the spinal canal. You should not use air injection captive bolt.
There are guns that operate with air pressure.
Yes, that's fine.
However, those newer guns do not blow the air into the brain. It exhausts the air out to prevent it from pushing into the body and the bloodstream.
Well, yeah, air operated is fine, but on the old air injection stunners, they were very common in the late 80s and the early 90s.
Right.
The stunner rod had air holes, so air came out of the stunner rod. And I hated them because you'd get brain splatter all over.
You would get brains, literally, Renata, you would have brains flying in your face when you were watching.
And they were spreading brain material, which is called at-risk material. So air operated, that's very good. Your best stunners, like the Jarvis, they're air operated. You see, I want to make sure we're differentiating between air operated and air injection. These older stunners actually injected air into the brain cavity. That is banned. We've had it banned for years.
Perfeito. Mais questões aqui chegando. Ana Carolina Marques, parabéns pela palestra, uma honra acompanhar um nível técnico como este. Parabéns pela integração entre a Temple e Erika. E aqui uma questão de Abdelatif Bidar, que é uma questão que a gente sempre escuta, né, e está habituado. Quanto tempo dura, em média, uma faca, né? Porque vocês falaram bastante em afiar a faca o tempo todo. Existe um tempo médio?
Well, there's many different kinds of steel they use for knives. Let's just go on the outcome. Now, this knife here is, this is pretty bad right here, but a really good knife, and it has to be long enough, it will pass the paper test. Let's just go with the outcome, because there's so many different kinds of steels they can make knives out of. Some people know how to sharpen them, some people don't. So it's the outcome. Does it pass the paper test, which both of my knives failed? No, there is no average. I wouldn't want to say that. Let's go with what's the outcome-based measure.
Right. And some of the things that are going to affect it, the really good slaughter knife cost about $400 US. Okay. And it's made with a very hardened steel, and they're usually hand honed. Okay. If you use an automatic sharpener, that knife's going to wear out much faster. Okay. Than if you're hand honing it.
Well, the other
problem, so there's so many things that can affect how long that knife lasts. The strength of the metal, how you're sharpening it, how much did you pay in the first place? Is it a good knife or a cheap knife? You know, are you nicking the bones? Are you nicking it against the metal on the equipment? Many things can affect that knife.
That's absolutely right. Also, with this study of some of the controversy with the study with Gibson, the knife was sharpened with a mechanical grinder, which would make a rougher surface. I want to emphasize that the research that I did in 1994, it was a kosher knife, perfect conditions with that big long kosher knife. Every other type of knife I've seen cutting a live adult cattle has been bad.
Perfeito. Mais questões chegando aqui do Gregório Pinheiros. Qual que é a opinião de vocês sobre o atordoamento com gases, CO, CO2 e argon, por exemplo?
Okay, with chicken, I've seen CO2 stunning with chicken done very well. And the new systems, we recently had one installed in the US, has windows where you can look in there and watch the behavior before the birds fall over. And to stun chickens well, you have to raise the CO2 levels very slowly. If you raise the CO2 levels too quickly, the chickens will be jumping all around and attempting to get out of the container. So it's very important you have this equipment that you never speed it up, because if you speed it up, the chickens will have a bad reaction. The way to evaluate what's called controlled atmosphere stunning is the behavior of your animal, whatever the animal is, before it loses the ability to stand. And one place I draw the line, if that animal tries to get out of the container, that's called an escape movement, that's absolutely not acceptable. Now you will get, on the good chicken system, you'll get a little bit of this and a little bit of this. But now we have to look at the entire system. In chicken, one of the big advantages that I have with controlled atmosphere stunning is I do not have to hang live chickens on the shackles. And when you hang live chickens on the shackles, it's very stressful. That's been shown in 3 different scientific studies. Also, I don't have to supervise people hanging live chickens on shackles. So with these systems, I can bring in the transport containers and handle them, and people do not handle chickens at the factory until after they've gone through the controlled atmosphere. So a little bit of this or this may be a good trade-off to avoid all the problems I have with hanging live birds on the line. So for chicken, I'm a big supporter of controlled atmosphere stunning. But the bottom line is the new systems have windows where you can watch. In fact, I saw an advertisement for one just the other day with a person looking in the window to see what the birds were doing, because that's your outcome measure, is behavior before the chickens lose posture, the ability to stand.
Muito bom. Ainda falando sobre a avicultura, tem mais uma questão que chegou aqui do Nabil Antar, e ele gostaria de saber da luz de dentro da área de sangria de aves, se deve ser cor azul ou normal branca, mesmo que usando o atordoamento.
Well, usually most places have found that blue light keeps them calmer. Now, if you use controlled atmosphere, where you actually, well, some of these systems actually kill the chickens, then it doesn't matter what kind of lighting you have. Turkeys, we've had many companies go to controlled atmosphere, again, slow induction CO2 stunning, because hanging live big turkeys on the line is really bad for the workers' backs. But usually most of our plants, though, it's either really dim lighting or blue lighting in the live chicken area. Also, it's very important to have a smooth line, have a belly rub, which is a piece of conveyor belting hang down so that the breast of the chicken presses against that. That helps to keep them calmer when you have live birds on the line. Maybe, Erika, you've got something you might want to say, things you observed on that.
When they're going into the stunner, it's really important to have them have that breast rub and make sure that your shackles are maintaining contact, that you're not getting shackle jumping, okay? You're not getting pre-shock from like water overflow going into the ramp, okay? Because if you stand at the stunner entrance and you're getting splashed and you hear birds making noises, that means you have a problem. That means you have shackle jumping and pre-shock, and you have a problem.
Well, another thing I want to mention, okay, if you're doing halal slaughter with a real light electric stunning on just a regular water bath stunner, where it's a recoverable stun, they wake up very, very quickly.
Very fast.
Very, very fast. So I went to one plant, and it was in Brazil, probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. I went to a plant in Brazil, and they were doing halal with the water bath stunning, and there were chickens waking up. We had to take the bleeding machine and move it this close to the exit from the stunner. So they came right out and instantly went into the automatic cutting machine.
Yeah, or even with the hand bleeders too.
With hand cutting, they come out, it's boom, you've got to cut them or they'll wake up. Let's talk about a little bit about chicken, how I can tell if chickens are waking up. If chickens are unconscious, they will shake the wing, they'll vibrate the wings. This is good. They'll vibrate the wings sort of like this. They'll just do this. When they start to wake up, they put them out like this. And if they're doing this, that's a failed audit. You've got to get them cut while they're still in this tremor or vibrating. And that is a sign that you are causing epileptic activity in the brain and making those birds unconscious.
Okay. More questions?
Muito bom, tem várias questões aqui chegando, eu tinha até selecionado uma delas aqui também, bem importante, da Kalina Maria de Medeiros, e ela pergunta qual que seria o jeito mais apropriado, digamos assim, eficiente para você orientar um trabalhador, um funcionário de uma planta frigorífica sobre a importância do uso de boas práticas de bem-estar animal. Qual seria o jeito mais correto de orientar esses trabalhadores e profissionais? E por isso que eu separei essa questão que a gente enfrenta muito, né? É bem corriqueiro esse tipo de questão também, e de um jeito de abordar esses trabalhadores.
It's really important that workers understand the signs of unconsciousness, because it's been bad situations where the workers thought a kicking back leg was conscious and that they were working on live animals. That's horrible. It's important for workers to understand that animals feel pain, but they also need to know what is a sign of it's unconscious, so they're not going to feel bad about cutting a foot off, a carcass where the meat may still be twitching. That's definitely not conscious. And they need to understand, yes, animals do feel pain, animals feel fear, and it's the right thing to do. Yeah, we're going to use them for food. We owe it to those animals. We give them a good life out on the farm, and when they come into the slaughterhouse, it's painless. And with cattle, another reason for good methods is safety. You do things like jam too many cattle into the crowd pen, people are more likely to get hurt. You use good handling where they just flow up the race, people less likely to get hurt or have cattle turn back on them or kick them or do something else bad. But it's essential that workers understand on the cattle stunning that basically the head has to be dead. The rest of the body, can still move.
I'll make a few comments. I'm very fortunate in that a lot of the plants that I work with, I'll spend a day at the plant ahead of time and I'll make some videos of the people doing their job, and I'll make some pictures. And sometimes we use the videos to outline people doing a good job. Sometimes we use the videos to outline and troubleshoot what do we need to change. But I find that if people have a chance to see something and view it and kind of troubleshoot as a team, that it helps them a lot to understand, like the picture that Dr. Grandin showed, where the cattle were not walking on the shadow. Okay, you can have people kind of learn to think like the cow if they see pictures like that or they see videos. A friend of ours in Europe, Susan Shiflett, she said, have them practice, somebody be the cow and somebody be the handler, and let them practice on each other and show each other what it's going to be like. What's the cow going to do when you stand in front and hold your rattle paddle up and go like this? What's the cow going to do? Because they can realize, they really need to realize that every animal reacts differently. And they need to understand that the way you treat a Nelore bull that's been in a pasture is entirely different than the way you treat a dairy cow that gets milked every day. You don't treat them the same. You don't hover over a Nelore bull. You'll get killed. You can't do that. You can't get too close to a Nelore bull that's in a pasture all his life. He'll be scared to death and hurt you. So it's really important that they learn the differences.
I just want to mention, there was a question that came up, and there was an important question that I saw in English on the chat about time of death with a neck cut versus a thoracic cut. Okay, so I guess the slaughterhouse was cutting the neck first and then do a thoracic cut. And then the question was, which one did it die from? It's going to depend upon how well the neck cut was done, the time interval between the two cuts. If you increase the time interval a little bit, then it would probably die from the neck cut.
Pois é, tem uma questão aqui justamente que é do Habib, né? O Habib Minissária, e ele fala no abate halal, há um corte halal, depois a questão, por exemplo, da aderência, da questão torácica, né? Em sua opinião, o animal morreria como resultado do corte halal, ou da questão torácica, ou de ambos, né?
Well, that was a question. I just answered that. I don't know if
Ok.
it got translated or not. Did it get translated?
Tá, ok. Era
That was a question
só
I
para enfatizar, ok.
just
O
answered.
Carlos Alberto também perguntando aqui, dando uma opinião, o regulamento 1099 de 2009 da Europa diz que os animais devem ser abatidos sem demoras desnecessárias após o desembarque no frigorífico. No Brasil, há legislação que trata sobre o tempo de jejum pré-abate no curral do frigorífico, está em revisão pelo MAPA, pelo Ministério da Agricultura. As doutoras poderiam sugerir essa quantidade de horas para essa legislação que está por vir? Qual seria?
Well, I would get rid of some of this fasting stuff. That's something that's been going on for years. They used to have that in Australia too, and they finally got rid of it. It's important to have some rest. I do not want cattle or sheep just come off the truck, bam, you slaughter them. That's not good. They need a little few hours of rest, but there's no advantage to fasting. I think it's something that just needs to be stopped.
Well,
Also,
some of it may be occurring, Temple, in poultry
Oh, you're talking
and
poultry here?
in livestock. Some of the feed removal may be occurring to prevent like nausea during transport, and also the gut being too full for food safety reasons because of regurgitation.
Yeah, but
So
that's
fasting, you know, like there's a feed withdrawal, Renata.
Yeah.
There's a feed withdrawal, and you withdraw feed for a certain period, okay, in order to let what's in the stomach tend to move through so that you're not having regurgitation during slaughter. But you don't want to fast to the point where they're starving, because that actually makes the meat, you run out of glycogen and it makes the meat very dark.
Well, the other problem, you see, you need a certain amount of feed withdrawal. That's true.
Yes.
What's going on with some of these cattle, then they're fasting them some more time at the lairage, which just gets too long. And then one of the problems you can have is you can make the gut contents worse because they're so hungry, they're tanking up on water. And then you have they're drinking lots of water, and that makes it worse. Yeah, there's some feed withdrawal, yes, is good, but just having an arbitrary fixed fasting time at a lairage, we do not have that. You know, many countries do not have that. That's a really old thing, and something that in cattle, and I want to emphasize just in cattle here, they need to get rid of that.
Muito bom, a gente vai continuar aqui depois a nossa segunda rodada de questões. Estou vendo vários comentários aqui. Lara Bonfim, médica veterinária, consultora em indústrias frigoríficas. Tem muitas outras perguntas. A gente volta daqui a pouquinho para a nossa segunda rodada de questões, mas gostaria de colocar aqui para fazer também um balanço, né, dessa primeira parte aqui. Ali, com você a palavra.
Vamos lá, então. Foi maravilhoso, eu quero novamente agradecer a todos e a todas. Eu queria fazer alguns comentários aqui, até baseado em algumas perguntas que foram feitas. A questão do uso da pistola penetrativa para a questão do halal. Lógico, o CDIAL, voltamos a dizer, o CDIAL, como outra qualquer certificadora, ela tem por obrigação fazer com que os regulamentos dos países islâmicos ou do mercado não seja cumprido. E, na grande maioria dos países, o uso dessa pistola ela é proibida. Então, existe um pequeno mercado que aceita, a questão da Malásia, aceita a pistola de impacto, algumas situações como essa. Mas o webinar, a ideia do webinar aqui é realmente um debate aberto. Nós queremos aprender e discutir claramente com essas duas palestrantes maravilhosas que nós temos, históricas, sobretudo para aprender, vamos aprender e vamos crescer nesse setor. Então, o debate tem que ser aberto. Então, dito isso, eu quero também fazer outros comentários, como o Dr. Habib, que falou, o Dr. Habib é um homem de grande história e ao meu ver, nós do CDIAL aprendemos muito com ele, e ele fez esse questionamento para mim lá atrás, e até em algumas palestras que ele foi diretor do McDonald's, qualidade do McDonald's no Oriente Médio, hoje ele está em outra empresa, sobre a questão da dúvida. Quando o animal morre, se eu fazer o thorax stick e também fazer um outro tipo de... fazer o abate e depois aplicar aquele thorax stick. Então, feito os dois em momento rápido, afinal de contas, quando que o animal morre pelo motivo da degola ou pelo motivo do thorax stick? Acho que são questões de suma importância que a gente tem que discutir. E nada melhor do que esses momentos para a gente poder falar claramente, né? Então, eu queria deixar bem claro isso, que hoje nós estamos fazendo aqui, aprendendo questões técnicas e práticas, mas sempre lembrando que devemos respeitar os países, os entendimentos, os regulamentos de todos os países importadores. Eu estou muito ansioso para ouvir o Sheikh Mohammed até sobre isso, né? Sobre essas questões. Onde que é a linha, até onde eu posso me aventurar ou dar um passo à frente na religião, porque existem questões que são de necessidade imediata. Alguns países dizem o seguinte: se o animal escapado da degola de forma correta, você pode usar uma pistola de impacto ou penetrativa, por uma questão de segurança das pessoas que estão trabalhando lá e etc. Mas é bem claro que tudo que nós queremos aprender aqui é de como aplicar o halal, com todos esses regulamentos diferentes, entendimentos de países importadores, e ao mesmo tempo respeitar e levar em conjunto o bem-estar animal. Como desde sempre nós estamos dizendo, são duas palavras diferentes, frases diferentes, mas que devem caminhar em conjunto. Muito obrigado.
Muito bom, Ali, você colocar e pontuar todas essas questões, né? E já, claro, aproveitando essa oportunidade, já introduzindo aqui com a gente o Sheikh Mohammed El Bukai, para trazer, então, toda essa parte religiosa, né? E os ensinamentos que a gente pode compreender a partir da questão do mercado halal e abate halal. Então, contigo a palavra, Sheikh.
Muito obrigado, Renata. Obrigado, Ali, pelas palavras. Eu quero primeiro agradecer e parabenizar as doutoras, né, pela apresentação muito rica que trouxe hoje para nós também sobre o abate halal e dizer que realmente todas essas regras, todas essas técnicas novas que eles deixaram para nós também entra nesse conceito halal, porque halal, como falei no passado, que halal significa um bem-estar animal. Então, todas as técnicas que a gente hoje tem, e podem aparecer no futuro, porque no futuro nós podemos ter também outras ferramentas que podem trazer mais conforto para o animal. Então, sejam muito bem-vindas, que serão bem-vindas sempre, porque realmente isso que a vontade divina, né, de chamar a nossa atenção. Eu acredito que as religiões chamaram a nossa atenção já bem antes, né, do passado, sobre a importância desse negócio, ou desse mercado, ou desse alimento que não é igual a outros alimentos. Esse alimento, esse mercado, ele é diferente, exige tanto no kosher enquanto no halal. Já a gente pode aprender que esse tipo de alimento ele tem uma forma diferente dos outros. Por isso, acho que as religiões que chamaram a nossa atenção assim, nessas palavras, né, que ficaram famosas, kosher ou halal, para dizer para nós ter muito cuidado em relação desse mercado. Agora, é muito importante a gente saber que o halal também não só significa o bem-estar animal, mas também significa o bem-estar do ser humano. Então, o conforto do animal e também a saúde do ser humano, que ele vai consumir essa carne. Por isso é muito importante também trabalhar nos dois, bem-estar animal, também o bem-estar do ser humano, que ele vai consumir no final essa carne. Por isso nós confiamos muito das orientações divinas, como a gente sabe que o animal não consegue expressar e falar para nós se ele está sofrendo, que está doendo, não está doendo, está sofrendo dessa forma. Ele não se explica, eu prefiro ser daquele jeito, usar aquela forma. Por isso nós confiamos no Criador, que ele nos passou as informações, como ele é Criador, ele sabe melhor de que forma podemos ser também misericordiosos com suas criaturas, mesmo usando para o nosso benefício. Então, por isso, as regras religiosas, eu acredito que eles têm essa, por mais que talvez fisicamente a gente não percebe isso, mas nós, como seguidores das religiões, nós acreditamos também no invisível, não só o mundo material, nós acreditamos também no mundo invisível. Eu posso dizer uma coisa agora que parece uma coisa assim estranha, mas realmente o que nós podemos acreditar, né? Porque vem das fontes religiosas, vem de uma forma, porque no final o nosso Deus também invisível. Então nós temos essa crença no invisível. É muito importante quando a religião fala para nós uma informação ligada a esse mundo, nós temos que também levar em consideração, nós temos que estudar e refletir. Quando uma das condições, né, do abate halal, quando a pessoa vai fazer esse abate, tem que citar o nome de Deus. E eu acredito que essas palavras, né, a gente não percebe isso, mas essas palavras também, além de ser pedir autorização do Criador de fazer esse abate, também servem como a palavra que foi usada muito, a sensibilização, né, do animal, sensibilização do animal. Então, essas palavras trazem um conforto para tem relatos até proféticos que dizem que o animal, quando é usada essas formas, essas regras, ele não percebe a dor. Aquela dor some, né, para aquele animal quando ele segue essas regras. Então, seguindo a orientação do Criador, eu acredito que é muito importante em qualquer situação, né, principalmente quando tratar com a vida. Então, isso aqui eu acredito é muito importante a gente saber que também tratar bem o animal ou lidar bem com essas criaturas, no Islã, eles não são apenas uma coisa técnica, uma coisa ética, mas são ligadas à crença islâmica. Então, o muçulmano faz isso acreditando que qualquer erro, qualquer é considerado como injustiça contra um animal. A injustiça é uma coisa que a pessoa vai pagar. Então, tratar mal o animal, tanto na abate, quanto em qualquer situação, isso aqui não só apenas uma falta de ética. Eu acho que a religião eternizou esse bem-estar animal através dos textos sagrados, através dos ditos do profeta, que ninguém pode, no futuro, mudar ou alterar. Então, isso aqui é só apenas uma introdução que podemos falar sobre, e também, como falei, que essas regras técnicas que foram colocadas aqui são muito importantes, que entram também nesse conceito halal, porque qualquer ferramenta, qualquer coisa que pode facilitar esse processo do halal, do animal, do bem-estar, seja bem-vinda e faz parte dessa palavra halal. A palavra halal é uma palavra árabe que significa o lícito. Então, tudo que é permitido é chamado halal, seja comida ou qualquer outra coisa. Tudo que é permitido é chamado halal. Essa palavra aqui também, do lado dela, existe a palavra haram. Haram quer dizer o ilícito. Então, tem o halal, que é ilícito, tem o haram, que é ilícito. Tudo aquilo que segue as regras que Deus deu para nós é chamado halal. Aquilo que não atende essas regras é chamado haram, que é ilícito. Mas depois essa palavra foi usada só na parte do alimento. Então, quando a gente fala halal, as pessoas entendem aquilo que pode consumir como comida, como bebida. Então, mais tarde, essa palavra foi usada só apenas para a carne. Então, quando hoje em dia fala a palavra halal, então as pessoas já entendem que quer dizer a carne halal. Então, claro que, como falei, esse é um tema bem antigo no Islã, bem já os juristas islâmicos, eles estudaram esse assunto faz muito tempo e colocaram todas as regras que precisam ser seguidas. Mas antes de colocar essa parte, né, eu gostaria de falar um pouco sobre como o Islã, como o Alcorão, como um livro sagrado, lida com esse mundo do animal, esse mundo que Deus criou para toda a humanidade e criou para nós para ter esse equilíbrio também no meio ambiente, para ter essa vida completa, integral entre todas as criaturas que Deus criou. Então, nós temos aqui algumas verdades que nós temos que saber em relação ao mundo animal que Deus nos informou. A primeira realidade é que esse mundo animal é um mundo à parte, que ele tem suas regras, um mundo inteiro, completo, que Deus criou para ter esse equilíbrio. Mas eles têm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala diz no Alcorão Sagrado, illa umamun amthalukum, que quer dizer todas essas criaturas, os animais, são nações semelhantes a nós. Têm suas vidas, suas regras, então não são criaturas inferiores. A palavra aqui, amthalukum, é uma palavra corânica que significa que são iguais a vocês. Então nunca podemos ver esse mundo como um mundo inferior, porque Deus já fala que são criaturas semelhantes. A segunda verdade que nós temos que saber que esses animais, essas criaturas também, eles têm uma linguagem especial entre eles, específica, que eles se falam, se comunicam, né? Se comunicam mais, melhor, né? Falar que eles têm uma forma de comunicação entre eles, e o Alcorão cita para nós muitos exemplos. Alguns profetas, eles tiveram essa capacidade de conversar com os animais, como o caso do profeta Salomão, quando conversou com os pássaros, conversou com aquela formiga que se tornou famosa também no Alcorão. Então, essa forma da comunicação entre os animais e com alguns seres humanos, isso significa que são criaturas dignas. Também outra coisa que Deus falou e deixou bem claro que todas essas criaturas, todos os animais, eles oram, eles glorificam. Não existe nada, como diz no Alcorão Sagrado, nenhuma criatura a não ser glorifica e agradece e ora para o nosso Criador. Então, são criaturas dignas, criaturas que glorificam, que comunicam, que têm suas vidas e são nossos parceiros aqui nesse planeta Terra. Não são criaturas assim inferiores, mas são criaturas importantes aliás, para a nossa vida, para esse equilíbrio. A existência dos animais é muito importante para nós, para nossas vidas, não só para a vida deles. Para ter esse equilíbrio, tem muitos estudos que comprovam a importância de cada animal que foi criado para a integridade, para essa vida ser uma vida completa. A terceira verdade que o Alcorão também que nos fala que existe parte desses animais. Não todos os animais servem como alimentação para o ser humano. Então, existe uma parte dos animais que, aliás, Deus criou e preparou para essa missão, que dão leite, dão comida, a gente usa para o nosso serviço, como para viajar, como remédio às vezes. Então, uma parte desses animais foram criados para servir o ser humano. Outros foram criados para outras também finalidades, mas alguns foram criados para servir e ajudar o ser humano tanto na alimentação enquanto da viagem, como transporte, como remédio, como muitas outras, como vestimenta também. Então Deus permitiu, autorizou para o ser humano usar essas ferramentas, essas coisas que saem do animal para o benefício do ser humano. Então, isso aqui, o Alcorão, um livro, também tem muitos... os animais serão muito privilegiados, né, no Alcorão Sagrado. Se você vê o nome das suratas, os versículos que fala, parece que o livro divino, que tem grandes suratas, nós temos 114 suratas do Alcorão Sagrado, todas as suratas. E quase 10% dessas suratas tem um nome dos animais. Carrega o título dos animais. A maior surata do Alcorão é a surata da vaca. Tem outra surata também chamada os animais. Tem outras surata da aranha, abelha, formigas, outras, né, o elefante, muitas outros animais citados no Alcorão Sagrado. Se a gente vê os versículos, você tem como chama a atenção a presença bem forte dessas criaturas, como fazem parte aqui dessa terra. Então, o Alcorão já tem essa informação que traz para nós, colocar num livro sagrado, recitado até o dia do final. Isso, com certeza, traz para nós uma outra visão, outra filosofia para enxergar essas criaturas como são criaturas do nosso Criador. Agora, também o profeta Muhammad, que a paz de Deus seja com ele, também nos ensinou de uma forma prática na sua vida. A Sunnah quer dizer a tradição do profeta Muhammad. Então, da que maneira? Porque além do texto sagrado, nós temos o técnico que ensina, que nos ensinou como podemos lidar com esses animais, né? Então, Deus revelou um livro, um manual, e também mandou um técnico, um profeta, para nos ensinar como usar e colocar aquilo de uma forma prática. A vida do profeta realmente presenciou muitas ditos e muitos comportamentos, né, que indica quanto é importante essas criaturas e quanto é importante a gente lidar de melhor forma e tratar com muito respeito, com muita misericórdia essas criaturas, que algumas delas dependem de nós, do alimento, da ajuda, da sobrevivência. Então, Deus colocou isso como uma responsabilidade do ser humano. O profeta Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam tem vários ditos, estão aqui podem ler na apresentação que aparece, mas realmente muitos ditos. O profeta Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam diz: qualquer muçulmano que coloca uma planta e passa qualquer animal, qualquer ser humano, e aproveita essa planta, ele será recompensado de cada animal, cada ser humano aproveita essa planta, tanto na comida quanto na sombra, se for uma árvore. Então, animal também, quando dá comida para o animal, você acaba ganhando a recompensa de Deus. Então, isso aqui é a vantagem também da religião, como falei, que ligar essas práticas com a crença, com o paraíso. Aqui nós temos um dito do profeta Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam que diz: uma mulher entrará no inferno porque ela maltratou um gato, enquanto outra também, um homem que ele tratou bem um cachorro, ele levou água para ele entrará no paraíso. Uma coisa bem forte ligar essas condutas, essas práticas com grandes princípios da existência do ser humano, que é o paraíso e o inferno. Não apenas uma ética, não apenas uma falta de ética que a pessoa pode fazer, mas uma coisa que pode levar até o inferno, leva a pessoa a carregar injustiça. Se ele comete uma injustiça contra o animal, aí no dia do juízo final ele pode perder a chance de entrar no paraíso por causa disso. Então, uma coisa bem forte que até o profeta Muhammad, que a paz de Deus esteja com ele, uma história aqui que cita como um camelo, ele queixou, falou com o profeta Muhammad, que a paz de Deus esteja com ele, reclamou do seu dono, que ele sempre deixava ele com fome, ele sobrecarregava coisas assim pesadas. Então, quando o profeta entrou, o camelo começou a chorar, aí o profeta aproximou, começou a fazer carinho em cima do camelo, aí, e depois ele perguntou, quem é o dono desse camelo? Um dos companheiros falou, era para ele, né? Aí o profeta falou para ele, você não teme Deus em relação desse animal, porque ele queixou você, ele falou para mim que você está deixando sem comida e está deixando ele sofrer, sobrecarregando ele com coisas pesadas. Então, olha essa misericórdia, esse tratamento muito elevado, escutar um animal falando, ainda bem que o profeta escutava, né? Mas nós não temos essas habilidades, por isso nós confiamos que o profeta fala, porque ele não fala de si mesmo, ele fala de Deus. Quando Deus fala que essa maneira que o animal fica tranquilo, esse animal fica bem, e a carne dele fica bem também, isso aqui serve para vocês. Então nós temos que ter essa confiança nas palavras, porque olha, o profeta falava com eles, a gente não consegue falar. Então o profeta fala, é diferente quando qualquer outra pessoa fala disso. Outros títulos também, agora na civilização islâmica também foi uma grande importância, né? Na civilização islâmica, os animais tiveram uma grande importância, tanto na área científica, no estudo e na pesquisa. Então foram pioneiros, né, de trabalhar, entrar nesse mundo, tentando descobrir, seguindo a ordem de Deus para tentar descobrir. Nós temos aqui, por exemplo, o primeiro livro, 1000 anos antes do Darwin, o Al-Jahiz, dos Jahiz que no século IX, que ele colocou as primeiras regras da teoria da evolução. Por exemplo, o livro do Al-Haywan, do Damiri também, que ele falou de muitos tipos dos animais. Então, os muçulmanos já entenderam como o Alcorão ele é um livro que tem muitos animais e eles fazem parte dessa criatura, entenderam que esse mundo é importante e começaram a estudar, e descobriram muitas assim, coisas importantes, né, que colocaram para estudar e para pesquisar. Agora, em relação ao comportamento dos animais na civilização islâmica, também foi uma coisa que realmente chama a atenção, como eles entenderam tantos ditos do profeta que falou dos animais, como lidou com eles, como tratou bem. Então, também foi uma das coisas que foi marcada, né, na civilização islâmica, as fundações que foram feitas para os animais. Tinha lugares específicos nas avenidas, né, nas estradas, quando as pessoas viajam, sempre foram criados assim, oásis, né, foram criados lugares para o descanso dos animais, não só dos passageiros, mas também para os animais. Em Damasco, nós temos, eu conheço essa casa, uma mesquita agora, que é chamada até agora Mesquita dos Gatos, onde era um lugar para os gatos que não têm dono, os gatos que eles estavam assim, idosas, que não têm jogadas, talvez. Então, tinha um lugar, uma fundação específica que os muçulmanos colocaram só para cuidar. Tem outra também para os cachorros perdidos, que não têm donos. Então, uma fundação específica para cuidar desses animais, porque foram realmente, como entenderam tudo isso com duas fontes importantes do Islã, que é o Corão e a Sunna do profeta Muhammad, que a paz de Deus seja com ele. Então, agora, também, com tudo isso, na jurisprudência islâmica também cuidou bem dessa área, porque a jurisprudência estudou muito, assim, muitos assuntos ligados aos animais, o que é lícito, o que é ilícito, o que pode comer ou quem não pode comer, o que tem, por exemplo, a saliva pura ou impura. Então, muitos assuntos ligados aos animais que entraram na pesquisa da jurisprudência islâmica, e os muçulmanos estudaram isso com muito tempo atrás. Agora, em relação ao abate halal, também tem uns capítulos, uns livros, né, que foram feitos sobre essa questão, né, como o Islã já deixou bem claro, né, que tranquilizar os animais é muito, muito importante. O profeta Muhammad, que a paz de Deus esteja com ele, colocou uma regra, um hadith, que deixou, acho que esse hadith foi a base da forma, da maneira de abate, quando o profeta diz: إذا قتلتم فأحسنوا القتلة وإذا ذبحتم فأحسنوا الذبحة وليحد أحدكم شفرته وليرح ذبيحته. Então Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescreveu ou mandou a excelência em cima de todas as coisas. Então, na hora que vocês vão sacrificar ou vão fazer esse abate, né, duas coisas que são importantes. Primeira coisa, afiar a faca bem, e também tranquilizar o animal. Então, tranquilizar o animal, aqui entra muitas coisas que psicologicamente não assim fazer esse abate, um animal olhando para o outro, e muitas regras que os sábios colocaram para esse bem-estar do animal, que também esse dito do profeta fala. E um dos assuntos também importantes, agora está se falando muito, né, que o Islã, como falei, que não só o bem-estar animal, mas também a saúde do ser humano. Então, essa questão da abate halal, um dos propósitos também que é a saída do sangue, que a sangue sai do animal, não fica. Então, de qualquer maneira, o mais importante, a regra mais importante é que o animal tem que ser morto por causa da abate, não ser morto por uma outra ferramenta, uma outra coisa. Porque esse aqui tem que entrar consciente, e pode ser essa questão da incivilização, qualquer coisa, mas não pode morrer. O animal não pode morrer, tem que ser vivo. E a coisa que indica que ele está vivo, se, por exemplo, depois dessa anestesia, será que ele tem chance dele sobreviver? Se a gente deixa esse animal sem se sacrificar ou sem abater, né? Então, ele volta vivo ou ele vai morrer? Então, essa aqui a questão. O Islã, ele deixa bem claro que o animal tem que ser vivo, e a causa da morte tem que ser pela abate. É claro, todos esse processo, né, para o conforto, tratar bem, tudo o que foi falado dessa parte técnica, e tudo isso é muito importante, que são também partes desse processo, desde o bom tratamento até o transporte, até todas essas, a maneira, a forma, né, tudo isso aqui tem que ser levado em consideração, porque a palavra halal não significa só um momento de abate, mas um processo começa com o nascimento do animal até o dia de abate. E outra coisa importante que na jurisprudência islâmica determina que o único uso, o objetivo desse abate, desse sacrifício, é uma alimentação, alimento, como alimento. Não pode ser feito para um outro objetivo, para uma outra coisa. Então, a única coisa que pode ser feita, abate, o sacrifício, né? Agora estamos 2 dias, né, do dia do sacrifício, a grande festa, né, para nós muçulmanos, que vai ser na sexta-feira. Então, esse sacrifício não quer dizer você vai agradar a Deus só sacrificando o animal. Esse sacrifício, Deus diz no Alcorão: لن ينال الله لحومها ولا دماؤها ولكن يناله التقوى منكم. Que essas carnes, esses sangues não vão beneficiar Deus. Então Deus se faz isso como forma da caridade, porque essa carne vai ser, vai ajudar, vai ser usada para ajudar as pessoas como alimento e só isso, não pode ser usada para uma outra forma. Isso aqui é muito importante, esse sacrifício. Pessoas pensam que você sacrifica para agradar Deus. Deus fica muito grato quando nós oferecemos essa carne para as pessoas necessitadas, para as pessoas que estão precisando da comida. Isso aqui agrada a Deus. Para resumir os direitos que os juristas muçulmanos colocaram, os direitos principais do animal: o primeiro direito é o direito da vida, o segundo direito é o direito da alimentação, ele não pode deixar ele com fome, e o direito também de proibir a dor, não pode torturar ou tratar mal ou bater. Então, qualquer tipo que traz a dor para essa criatura, para qualquer animal, para brincar ou para divertir, isso aqui tudo proibido no Islã. E no final tem o direito também que preservar a sua espécie para não desaparecer. Então são 4 direitos principais do animal que é muito citados na jurisprudência islâmica. Muito obrigado, e qualquer pergunta, vamos lá, inshallah, para tirar as dúvidas e perguntas.
Muito bom, Sheikh Mohammed El Bukai, tem realmente aqui muitas considerações, né? Você, de fato, mostrando, mais uma vez, demonstrando toda essa relação entre bem-estar animal e o mercado halal, pesquisas e debates, aliás, fortalecem aí toda a esfera, né, de entendimento para a tradição continuar. Muita gente aqui elogiando, com certeza, aí as suas considerações e, claro, essas questões mais realmente técnicas e religiosas da jurisprudência islâmica, tá? Continue aqui com a gente, então, muito obrigada. E eu gostaria de fazer mais algumas questões bem técnicas que chegaram aqui há pouco, tanto para a Erika Voogd quanto para a doutora Temple Grandin, para a gente ir para essa segunda rodada aqui de considerações. Então, eu tinha separado aqui mais algumas. Parabéns, Temple Grandin, Erika Voogd, pela palestra. Nós temos aqui uma questão, ótimo, do Youssef Mourad. Eu gostaria de perguntar se os animais beberem água com algum tipo de tranquilizante antes do abate, se teria algum efeito na carne?
Temple.
Temple, your sound,
You're
please.
mute.
I just did.
Okay.
All right. They giving any medication to an animal at a slaughterhouse violates just about every food safety law. You are not allowed to do that.
Yeah. In fact, you have to be very careful if you have a large animal like a horse, and you have that horse euthanized with a chemical, all right, like a phenobarbital, you have to bury it, because if that horse is out in the environment, the birds and the coyotes and other animals will eat it, and they will be sick or die from it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Perfeito. Mais questões chegando aqui da Lara Bonfim, médica veterinária consultor em indústrias frigoríficas. Qual a melhor maneira de sangrar ovinos após insensibilização por pistola pneumática? Pode ser por degola?
Yes, you can cut the neck same way you would for any method. Yeah, you can cut the neck, use the same methods.
And close to the jaw is better than down in the throat.
That's right, that's the same.
Yes.
Perfeito. Professor Alfredo Fernandes, no caso da extração do cérebro para consumo humano, a pistola de concussão sem penetração não seria mais apropriada por não danificar o órgão?
Yeah, it would. One of the reasons we used to use a lot of concussion stunning was to save brains. Actually, in the US, saving brains for food is banned because of mad cow disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which originally came from shape. And so all eating of nervous system materials is banned in the United States and in Europe. And so, no, we don't save them.
Perfeito. Mais questões chegando aqui do Carlos Alberto. É comum notarmos animais das raças britânicas apresentarem reflexos involuntários exacerbados quando comparados ao gado zebuíno. As doutoras poderiam comentar a respeito, se já viram esse tipo de situação e qual a possível causa?
Well, it's possible there may be some differences. It's never really been studied to look at, let's say, Nelore cattle versus Angus cattle on the amount of movements. There are a lot of individual differences on how much kicking you get. One of my students did a little bit of study on that and found that some of the Holsteins kicked more. It's something that probably needs to be more studied.
I will make a comment.
Okay.
If the kicking is occurring in an animal that has been stunned with a penetrating captive bolt, it could be that they're not penetrating to the brainstem. They're not doing damage to the brainstem. So if their angle is incorrect, instead of being flat on, if their angle is wrong, they may be causing brain concussion, but not damaging brainstem and not damaging the brain deep enough. If they're doing electrical stunning, you may see differences depending upon the variation in the size of the animals. Again, just like I was talking about with the difference in the weight. If you have a 400 kilogram bull and you have a 600 kilogram bull and you apply the same amount of amperage, you may not get as strong an effect on the 600 kilogram bull as you do on the 400. So you might see more kicking and reflex action with electrical stunning just because of the variation in the animal size. Does that make sense, Temple?
Está ótimo.
Well,
Olha
there's
só,
a lot of variation in electrical stunning. With electrical stunning, there's a lot of variation in how much some of the animals kick. Another thing that affects kicking with electrical stunning, it only takes 1 to 3 seconds to induce a grand mal seizure. Now, if you take a lamb and you hold the electrical stunning on it for maybe 30 seconds, then you will then you paralyze the walking circuit in the center of the spine, and it's not going to kick. But from a meat quality standpoint, if you do that, you're going to get more blood spots in the meat. There would be definite meat quality issues with that. But I have seen electrical stunning done long enough where it basically stops all the kicking.
Olha, mais questões chegando aqui da Margarete Del Bianchi. Vocês têm observado a ocorrência da síndrome de Burnout em colaboradores da linha de abate?
When you say the Burnout syndrome, could you? Oh, burnout. Okay. Yeah, there's some, what I find, I've kind of done some research on how employees behave on the slaughter plant. What I have found is that the people working in the lairage, many of those worked for years. They just handle the animals, they go through the hole in the wall and they're gone. Now with stunner operators, I have observed kind of three patterns. You have a person who's very good and you might as well be stapling boxes, you know, or some inanimate objects on an assembly line. I remember one guy, he used to read golf magazines up at the stun box. Then you have the imams and the rabbis that take it really seriously as a sacred ritual. And then you have a few people that get cruel. And those people have to be removed. When we started the McDonald's audits, we had to remove about 10% of the employees. Another thing you have to do is do not understaff and overwork. If somebody is so overworked that it makes it impossible to do a good job, that's just setting them up to start doing some cruel, bad stuff. Another reason why it's so important to have a stunner that works is because very frustrating for an employee if he places the stunner correctly and the gun is so poorly maintained, it doesn't make it unconscious with a single shot. There can be problems with this. This has been a big problem on farms. Because of COVID, we had to destroy a whole bunch of chickens out at the farms. And people that have to do this, I have gotten post-traumatic stress syndrome, where they had to kill thousands of animals. There's been quite a few research studies on attitudes towards euthanasia out at the farm. And it's something a lot of employees don't like doing it. People on the farm who like to care for animals don't really want to be involved in killing them. What I've observed on stunner operators, there's some that can do it for years and they're fine, and they might as well be boxes on a conveyor. And then there's others where they get into some really bad mental issues. Another thing that could help is rotating employees.
Really important, really important to rotate. You shouldn't say this guy's the best person cutting, so he should cut all day. That's really not fair. You need to have more than one person, because if he wins the lottery tomorrow, he's not going to be available. So
sick.
Yeah. So you need to have more than one person, and you need to rotate people and give them a break, give them a chance to go sharpen their knives, give them a chance to learn the different jobs. One thing we learned is that by having the person who prodded too much go down and work the shackle, they realized how much kicking is caused by the electric prod. And then they said, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore when I'm up in the box area, because it makes the cattle kick more.
And they care about their work colleague. They care about their work colleague not getting kicked.
Then they realize that they're the problem. That's another thing, cause of kicking. That adrenaline from the electric prod causes them to kick more.
That's absolutely right. And I cannot emphasize enough about understaffing and overworking. If people are worked to the point where they're so tired, they're just not going to care. It's easy for managers, managers that have never worked on a line, and I've worked on a line, and I know what it's like to get overworked to the point. I remember a cattle vaccinating line in the 70s, super hot weather, a 10-hour shift. You get to the point where you don't care.
Perfeito. Mais questões, uma que estava bem ali acima e que eu acho bastante pertinente a gente colocar aqui no nosso debate. Uma estudante estava perguntando qual ainda são as reais dificuldades que vocês encontram atualmente para implantar o bem-estar animal. Quais são atualmente as maiores dificuldades, os principais desafios para a implantação do sistema do bem-estar animal?
All right, let's just talk about different parts of animal welfare. At the slaughterhouse, there's good technologies available, and the most important thing is to maintain the stunners working right, the good handling, all of the understanding behavior principles of cattle and sheep handling, flight zone, point of balance. When I go to a well-run slaughterhouse today, the biggest welfare problems I see are coming from the farm. They're things I'm going to have to fix at the farm. For example, lame cattle that have difficulty walking, animals that have been, where the biology's been pushed too hard and they get fatigued and go down. It's something on the farm. Now, let's just discuss a little bit, a few farm issues. Beef cattle live outside, but where you've got a lot of other kinds of issues is the animals that are more intensively raised, like the laying hen. This is the hen that makes eggs. And the old-fashioned kind of cages, there's no enrichment for the hen. There's no place to nest in a secluded area, no place to perch, no place to scratch. And so to improve animal welfare of the laying hen, we need to give the laying hen some things that she wants. The cattle are outside, they get what they want. Broiler chickens are walking around, in a big barn. There's some interesting new research now on having a lighted area over the feeders and a darker area where they can choose which area they go in. This is environmental enrichment. And this is the area where we're probably going to have to do the most things. And then things like transportation. Well, how you pay for transportation makes a difference. If you pay a truck driver based on how many kilograms of cattle you loaded on a truck, he has no financial incentive to deliver them in good condition. If you pay him based on low levels of bruising, then he has an incentive, a financial incentive, to treat the animals well. But some of the biggest issues are going to be farm issues. Compared to the farm issues, the slaughterhouses are actually easier to fix than many of the farm issues.
And the thing I'll say about the slaughterhouse is it's kind of like saying, what's the problem with steering a cruise ship? Okay, you have to steer the cruise ship all the time. You don't just say, like, okay, I'm going to put it on autopilot and not worry about the waves and not worry about the other ships in the sea and not worry about the people. You have to steer it all the time, same as your car on the road. You can never stop managing. You can't say, like, I'm good today and everything's going to look exactly the same in 2 years, because your floors are going to get slippery and your people are going to change and the time of day will change and the light will change and the temperature will change and the animals will change. So you have to continually steer and keep things on track.
Well, it's just like the traffic. I've talked about the traffic, that you constantly have to have the police out there monitoring speed, monitoring drunk driving. It isn't fix it and that stays fixed. Slaughterhouse, transportation of livestock, handling out on the ranch, these are things that constantly have to be monitored.
Okay.
Muito bom. Também tem uma questão justamente agora para o Sheikh Mohammed El Bukai sobre as explicações religiosas relacionadas ao bem-estar animal, que é muito esclarecedor. Então, justamente, ainda havia muitas dúvidas, né, nesse quesito entre aliar, né, a questão religiosa do abate halal ao bem-estar animal, né, e como é que vocês vêm propagando tudo isso, Sheikh?
Então, é bom que ter esse entendimento, né, que o halal, dos significados do halal é bem-estar animal, porque não só apenas a forma de abater o animal, mas sim um processo inteiro que realmente eu acredito que a religião foi pioneira, né, de trazer essa informação para nós, que quando colocou essa forma específica para lidar com o animal, já está trazendo para nós que esse mercado é diferente dos outros. Nós temos que cuidar bem e lidar bem com ele antes e durante e depois também. Então, eu acredito que só a palavra halal ou a palavra kosher, né, são palavras religiosas, mas que eles já chamam a atenção do ser humano desse mundo, né? e como falei, que eternizou com regras religiosas ligadas com a religião, não só com a ética, né? A pessoa ligada com a sua religiosidade, com a sua fé, ligada com o seu destino, né? Se for injusto. Então, tudo isso eu acredito que deixa uma garantia que garante para os muçulmanos seguir esse caminho para sempre.
Muito bom. Também tem uma questão aqui para a doutora Temple e Erika sobre a atual posição, o atual status do Brasil no sentido do bem-estar animal. Como é que vocês estão avaliando, né? Lógico que a gente passa nesse momento pela pandemia e ainda o mundo todo enfrenta essa situação, mas um pouco antes, né? Como é que vocês enxergaram esse avanço do bem-estar animal aqui no Brasil, principalmente hoje, né? Focando na área de bovinocultura e ovinocultura, e claro, pós-pandemia também. Qual é a perspectiva de vocês em relação ao nosso país, ao Brasil?
Well, I've been to Brazil several times, and I was very impressed with a lot of your young students who are really interested in changing things. You know, cattle handling has improved. Things have improved. Now, the pandemic's been bad because auditors can't get out into the field, but it's been very bad for research. The pandemic in many countries has shut down research. But the students we have today, they're going to be, making the changes in the future. And you've got some great students that are going to do some good things for you in the future.
Yeah, and Renata, you know that we did a podcast, so I spent 7 minutes talking about the state of Brazil on the podcast, so I can't possibly tell you all the things. There are some real champions in Brazil, and there's some people that are working very hard to teach Brazilians and share all the best practices. And of course, you know, there's some great auditors, and there's some companies that take animal welfare very, very seriously and are learning how to do it better and have continuous improvement. There are always cases where we can make changes. And like Temple says, that's our job security.
Yeah.
Pois é, né? E aí a gente, claro, gostaria de colocar um pouco essa situação do pós-pandemia também, né? Como que vocês já estão enxergando, visto esse momento atual de volta a uma normalidade, né? Temple Grandin trouxe aqui para a gente que, obviamente, que atrapalha a questão das auditorias e tudo mais, mas, por exemplo, quando que vocês enxergam um horizonte, possibilidades, o que vocês vêm tendo de informações que a gente possa vir a voltar num ritmo, digamos, um pouco mais normal?
I think there's going to be some changes in things like conferences. People are going to want to get back and do in-person conferences, but we're also finding that there's some advantages with things that we're doing online. I think it's going to cut the travel industry down a lot. Okay, we get a good vaccine. Let's say we get a good vaccine that really works. I think people are going to start saying, well, no, we didn't really need to visit that customer, flying on a plane. We could do it virtually. The audits will get back going because there's definitely in-person audits that have to be done. That cannot be all put on video. I would never trust a video audit of a brand new plant I had never been in. Only one that I was very familiar with, walking the person around with a camera. Our research will get started up again. I can see a lot of things going back to normal, but I think that some of the conferences may go more hybrid. I don't think all the online stuff is going to go away.
No. Because
there's certain things that you miss. Like one of my students was really looking forward to meeting a really famous person in dairy cow welfare. And those kind of experiences were important to me when I was a student. She couldn't do it. But you know what we did? I had her call the person. I just said, call her up. But there's a need to get, in-person stuff. But maybe some of these conventions and stuff in the future won't be quite so big. It'll be interesting to see. And a lot of it's going to depend upon how well the vaccine works.
we're going to continue to need to eat food. And I can tell you that the first restaurant that we went to where I got to eat with 4 people in a restaurant in June, for the first time in 3.5 months, I was so excited to eat in a restaurant and sit with my friends. That was thrilling, something that I had desperately missed. Okay, so hopefully that will come back. I love being social. It was difficult to stay home and do, and not be with people. So I think that's going to be very important. We're going to continue to need to eat food. We've all learned to use Zoom, so we're getting better and better at that.
Well, I haven't eaten in a restaurant yet.
Yeah, well, you're a little higher risk than I am, okay?
I'm a higher risk, that's right. So I've got to be really careful.
Yeah.
Muito bom vocês colocarem essas considerações, enfim, todo esse momento atual pelo qual a humanidade passa, né, em alguns lugares mais enfaticamente, em outros um pouco menos, e até gostaria de ouvir um pouco da palavra do Ali aqui sobre o nosso debate, a nossa conversa já se iniciando, né, caminhando para o final. Ali, considerações também a fazer sobre essa questão que a gente estava falando há pouco, né, de mudança um pouco de perfil, eventos híbridos, parte continua mesmo online, presencial. O que você tem visto aí de ritmo do mercado?
Bom, nós, como certificadores, nós seguimos as determinações dos países islâmicos para se fazer cumprir essas normas. E quando houve a questão do isolamento, de pronto, esses países, através de seus órgãos oficiais, informaram a gente da importância de se preparar para auditoria bem clara e organizada, uma auditoria remota. Eu tenho que dizer que aprendemos muito com isso. Muita coisa ficou, de fato, aprendemos que tem muitos estágios que não precisávamos, que hoje temos melhor tecnologia. Eu acho que sairemos melhor da pandemia. Acho que todo o processo, tanto o certificador como as indústrias, vão estar um pouco melhor. A questão da burocracia, agilidade, isso tem sido muito importante. Mas é de suma importância que as indústrias, as pessoas, os profissionais que estão na área se prepararem por uma busca, por auditorias mais detalhadas, com documentação, porque mesmo com auditoria remota, quando é uma auditoria remota, você tem que mostrar com maior clareza, você tem que convencer as certificadoras e os auditores que o fato de nós não estarmos lá presente não cria dificuldade ou se algo vai ficar nebuloso e coisas do tipo. Então, eu sinto que mesmo com a questão do halal, bem-estar animal, acho que vai trazer mais tecnologia para poder controlar isso de forma mais assertiva. No caso do Sheikh, eu quero agradecer muito pelas palavras do Sheikh. O Sheikh falou, sabe, eu sempre me arrepio muito com essa questão do bem-estar, veja no Alcorão tantas suratas que é mencionado que os nomes dado ao nome de animais, ou quando o profeta questionou sobre o tratamento ao camelo, ou quando aquela pessoa que entra no paraíso por simplesmente salvar um cão, né, e o outro que vai para o inferno por deixar o animal morrer de fome. Então, todas essas questões devem ser levadas em consideração. Eu volto a repetir, o que nós discutimos hoje aqui, não estamos discutindo o regulamento dos países a países. Nós aqui podemos discutir com pessoas especializadas para chegar a um ponto que possamos melhorar e influenciar no nosso dia a dia. Temos as questões como a questão da sensibilização, abate sem sensibilização, quais são as técnicas. A doutora Temple trouxe a questão do abate religioso, de outras religiões. É importante para nós trocarmos informação de como melhorar, experiência. Então, eu vejo o seguinte, com toda essa questão, até a questão do Zoom, melhorou muito. Já pensou para conseguir trazer a doutora Temple para o Brasil? Como que eu conseguiria fazer isso? Nunca. Eu ia talvez precisar 2, 3 anos para conseguir a doutora a tempo e a nossa querida amiga Erika, para conseguir trazer. Então, há males que vêm para bem. Eu quero agradecer a Deus por essa oportunidade, né? Eu sei que seria muito difícil trazer essas pessoas de tamanha importância para o setor, né? E dessa forma, veja, há 2 anos atrás fizemos um evento com a Erika e foi um sucesso. Tinha 100 pessoas, foi um sucesso. Nós não tínhamos onde colocar mais 100 pessoas. Hoje nós estamos aí né, falando de centenas de pessoas assistindo e vai estar girando e vão estar aprendendo. Então, eu vejo que há males que vêm para bem e, graças a Deus, estamos caminhando e vamos tocando a vida.
Muito bom, Ali. Bom, você colocou aqui milhares de pessoas, foram mesmo, né? Além da grande parte aqui do Brasil, Nova Zelândia, África do Sul, Omã, França, Portugal, Colômbia, México, Chile. Então, realmente, você pontuou muito bem essa questão de conseguirmos atingir, através do compartilhamento de informações, o quanto isso é relevante, aprimora e agrega para a vida das pessoas, com esse olhar, né? E essa, digamos assim, substancialmente entrando, de fato, aí em várias regiões do mundo e através do uso da tecnologia. Como a gente não gosta de deixar ninguém sem a questão e sem a resposta, chegou uma há pouco do Javier, e justamente seria para aqui a doutora Temple e a doutora Erika Voogd. No momento do desembarque, no caso de vários animais permanecerem no caminhão sem querer descer, o que eu posso fazer para continuar o desembarque?
Well, there's a rare occasion you might have to use an electric prod. One of the things is be calm when you go to unload the truck, because some of the lower cattle, when they get scared, they tend to freeze up. And if you do the unloading calmly, you'll be less likely to have an animal that refuses to leave the truck.
The other important points is see what the animal sees. Is there a boss standing in the way? Is there something moving in the air? Is there a fan? Is there some reason they won't leave the truck? Okay. And if you can close off sections of the truck and gently move them towards the front without getting hurt,
Right.
that helps too. Okay. But try to determine what is causing them to not want to leave the truck in case there's some type of a distraction. The other thing that on occasion has worked is actually put another one back on the truck.
Yeah, that's right.
And have them tell them it's okay to come off.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. And usually in most places, when it comes to electric prods, they've totally banned them for unloading the trucks. But that's a really good idea, to just put another animal on there and then he'll follow. Because what's happened in some of those situations, especially with the lorry, they just get frozen with fear. Some of the worst animals for handling during unloading are short hauls. Animals that might have been 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, because they haven't had time to calm down on the truck during the travel time. And they're some of your worst animals to handle, more likely to have meat quality problems. Then because the most stressful part for most cattle is the loading and unloading. And then once they get transported, they calm down. Another important thing is good driving. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of good driving. No stamping on the brakes, no stamping on the gas. You get these sudden stopping, sudden turns like this, throwing your animals off balance. That's another issue. Good driving also matters a lot. And also do not overload the trailer, overload the vehicle, and have a non-slip floor in the vehicle.
And on the ramp at the exit.
And the ramp at the slaughterhouse must be non-slip.
Muito bom. Olha, aproveitando esse momento aqui final e, claro, já agradecendo muito, né? Daqui a pouco a gente vem para a mensagem final de todos os colaboradores, participantes aqui do nosso encontro, do nosso segundo webinar, CDIAL Halal, as demandas do mercado halal, bem como a questão do bem-estar animal, está aqui conosco, ao vivo. Ele que é o fundador da CDIAL Halal e também presidente, o senhor Saif. Nos ouve? Com a palavra você.
Boa tarde, tudo bem? Olha, eu queria agradecer muito a você, todos os ouvintes, todos os participantes. Eu tive a sorte de participar, de escutar, de ouvir. Um trabalho magno, parabéns para você, parabéns para os palestrantes, parabéns para a doutora dos Estados Unidos, parabéns para o Sheikh Bukai, o seu amigo Ali, que mashallah, trabalha, e você é uma estrela, filha. Parabéns por tudo. Eu espero que esse assunto de abate halal e assunto de bem-estar do animal segue juntos para melhorar a produção halal e melhorar o tratamento com os animais. Aqui o Brasil, eu acho que o Brasil deve ser uma guia para todo mundo a seguir, com questão de bem-estar do animal, com questão halal. Questão halal, graças a Deus, chegou a um nível que o mundo inteiro podia segui-la, e o bem-estar do animal, graças a Deus, aqui no Brasil, só podemos louvar a Deus por todos os esforços, trabalhos feitos. E agradecemos as doutoras que, graças a Deus, só enriqueceram esse trabalho nosso de halal, você vendo a jurisprudência islâmica e o trabalho que eles fizeram, a orientação que fizeram, ver que as coisas andam junto para melhorar a questão de animal, para melhorar a questão de ser humano também. Parabéns para vocês, eu não quero prolongar. Eu fiquei orgulhoso de ver essa palestra, ver esse debate, de ver essa questão bem discutida, e eu espero que temos mais encontro, mais sucesso no futuro. E você, minha querida, você é a estrela de tudo. Parabéns para você também, especial. Obrigado. Tchau, salam alaikum.
Muito obrigada, aqui as palavras, uma ótima tarde, senhor Saif, justamente mostrando e demonstrando o potencial do que é esse webinar. Então, para a gente ir caminhando aqui para o nosso final, eu gostaria de pedir uma mensagem, uma reflexão agora, para a gente fechar, do Mohamed El Bukai. Com você a palavra.
Muito obrigado pelo convite, pela organização, pelas informações. Eu acredito que vai ser muito benéfico para muitas pessoas, principalmente que escolheram o halal para ser ou a área do trabalho ou a área de negócio. É muito importante escutar todas essas informações e seguir, colocar na prática, e levando sempre em consideração aquela auditoria interior, que realmente a religião, antes de falar da abate halal, ele coloca essa consciência, coloca essa observação do muçulmano para o seu Criador. Ele não precisa fiscalização, porque ele já tem essa fiscalização, como ele vai lidar com o animal, como ele vai lidar com a vida do animal, como ele vai tratar bem. Mas muito obrigado, muito sucesso sempre. Obrigado, irmão Ali Saifi, pela organização. Para você, Renata, também pela apresentação maravilhosa. Para as duas doutoras realmente que enriqueceram esse encontro com muitas informações que vão ficar para sempre, iluminam esse campo do halal, inshallah, e cada vez melhor. Muito obrigado. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Muito obrigada, salam aleikum, nós que agradecemos. Olha que mensagem bonita da Caroline Ferreira aqui. Orgulho é a palavra que podemos utilizar para descrever esse webinar. Como disse o senhor Ali, estou muito agradecida pelos conhecimentos obtidos até aqui. Também temos uma audiência bastante relevante do Paquistão aqui conosco. Muito obrigada por todos os países mais uma vez. A sua palavra, Erika, agora, sua reflexão, sua mensagem final.
My first comment is to Sheikh Bukai. Okay. Temple and I were so thrilled to hear you speak at the last webinar, and we're so happy to have the slides in English. And I have to tell you that both times you spoke, instantly my cat was in the room. This time I turned off the video because all you could see was my cat going by, listening to you, okay? Obviously, he knows you're talking about the importance of animal welfare. He hears the whole thing, and he came the minute you started speaking. I want to thank both Mr. Seifes for their support on this, because it's so critical. And I truly believe that CDIAL is leading the animal welfare charge for Brazil and the other countries as far as halal goes. I believe that this is a very strong message that's being shared worldwide. Katia and Rebecca, it's a pleasure to have you translating. Renata, you are the best at what you do. You are a pro. And I have to say thank you to my teacher and my mentor and my very good friend, Dr. Grandin, because she's been tremendously supportive of me for 20 years and has really, really carried this message for a lot of people. She calls herself the grandmother of animal welfare. So we really, really appreciate it.
Oi, bye-bye.
Muito obrigada. Nós que agradecemos. Para a palavra, a reflexão final, sua mensagem, Temple Grandin.
Well, I just want to say that I thought you did a wonderful seminar. It was just great to have all these people from around the world communicating. We need to be doing more of these kinds of things. Thank you so much for having me, and wonderful job on improving animal welfare.
Muito bom. Para a gente, fechando aqui, é claro, para dar essa palavra final, essa reflexão, Ali Saif, com você.
Muito obrigado. Realmente, eu estou aqui emocionado, graças a Deus. Tivemos a oportunidade ímpar nesse momento, como tivemos em outras oportunidades. Eu quero agradecer de novo a doutora Tempo, a nossa querida amiga Erika, as tradutoras, a você, Renata, que faz um excelente trabalho, a nosso querido Sheikh Mohamed Al-Bukai, e também queria fazer eu queria fazer uma homenagem ao Sr. Saif.
Nós vamos aguardar alguns instantes, né? Que é um momento realmente de emoção, né? De homenagem, então, do Ali, nesse momento bastante especial, né? Então, ele gostaria de fazer uma homenagem ao seu pai, Dr. Saif. Ali, vamos lá. A gente sabe que é muita emoção, né? Mas a gente continua.
Meu professor, meu querido líder, meu querido homem que foi o grande líder e criador de tudo isso aqui, que Deus abençoe, que reconhecendo todo o seu trabalho, eu tenho um grande orgulho de representá-lo. Espero que o senhor esteja satisfeito comigo, eu agradeço a Deus. E quero agradecer e lembrar que agora, depois de amanhã, já é o nosso Eid, que é o nosso dia do sacrifício. Lembra a data em que Abraão sacrificou um animal para provar a adoração a Deus, que é a data da peregrinação dos muçulmanos, e que todos tenham boa Eid para todos vocês, e muito obrigado, e assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Muito obrigada, então, a todos que nos acompanharam em mais uma edição desse webinar, segunda edição, Bem-Estar Animal e as demandas do mercado halal. Eu agradeço aqui mais uma vez publicamente. Ali Saif, muitíssimo obrigada pelo convite, pela confiança. Estaremos juntos Parabéns aí a toda a organização do evento, para o Michel, para a sua equipe, para a Lúcia Nunes, da comunicação também. Agradeço aí ao Dr. Saif pelas lindas palavras, muitíssimo obrigada. Ao Sheikh Mohammed Al-Bukai, muito obrigada.
Obrigado.
Parabéns aí às tradutoras, tanto a Kátia quanto a Rebeca, um excelente trabalho de vocês. E muito obrigada também pelas palavras, Erika Voogd, doutora Temple Grandin. Realmente vocês são profissionais admiráveis, inspiradoras e que deixam um legado brilhante aí por onde passam. Parabéns pelo trabalho de vocês e a gente espera, claro, vê-las em outras oportunidades. Um grande dia para vocês e um ótimo aí restante de semana. Boa tarde a todos e boa noite já em alguns lugares. Paraguai aqui conosco também, vários países. Esse webinar vai ficar disponível daqui a pouco no YouTube da CDIAL Halal e também nas redes sociais, tá bom? Siga @CDIAL Halal. Uma ótima tarde ou ótima noite aí para todos. Tchau.
Tchau, tchau.